Germany of Iron and Blood. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 801, Abandon. Your Excellency, this is a telegram from General Hamilton. He wants us to send the 4th Army and 5th Army to attack Canterbury from London, break through the German defenses, and take them back to London. A general told the British Army Secretary Richard Haldane reported. Richard Haldane frowned tightly. He was undoubtedly very dissatisfied with the performance of the British Army in the Southeast Theatre. What? The are Hamilton and the others doing? Didn't he swear before that he would be able to withstand the German attack in Canterbury and even defeat them? In just a few days, such a problem has arisen. Richard Haldane complained. You must know that the troops assembled by the British Army in the Southeast Theatre are more elite than those in London. In the end, it ended up like this, which naturally made Richard Haldane very dissatisfied. What's more, the troops that Hamilton requested to be transferred were the only 2 elite army groups stationed in London. If there is any mistake in these 2 armies, the consequences will be even more unimaginable. Isn't London only protected by some mobs? Your Excellency, the Germans are too powerful, so that our plans in the Southeast Theatre could not be successful. Moreover, under the German attack, the losses were heavy. Under the onslaught of the Germans, the troops in the Southeast Theatre are indeed about to I can't hold on anymore, the general explained. Richard Haldane remained silent. The situation of the battle was so corrupted that it was beyond his expectation. But at the same time, he didn't want to send reinforcement to the Southeast Theatre anymore. In that case, London's defense will become even more empty. Once the Germans attacked London, what would they use to resist it? Your Excellency, Prime Minister, please go to the Prime Minister's office, the secretary reported. Richard Haldane's eyes flashed a hint of displeasure, and he could guess almost immediately that it must be Hamilton who sent a telegram to Prime Minister Churchill. Get the car ready, I'll be right there, Richard Haldane said. Sure enough, as soon as Richard Haldane saw Churchill asked about the battle situation in the Southeast Theatre. Your Excellency, the current situation in the Southeast Theatre is indeed very unfavorable to us. Under the onslaught of the Germans, the Southeast Theatre has lost more than 300,000 people. Moreover, this loss is still increasing. Richard said D. Haldane. 300,000 people. A trace of pain flashed across Churchill's face. For the British Empire, such a loss is simply too great. In particular, Churchill knew that the troops assembled in the Southeast Theatre were elite compared to other theatres. The loss caused to the British Empire is undoubtedly even greater. Yes, Your Excellency Prime Minister, especially the 2 elite troops, the 1st Army and the 2nd Army, are about to be disabled. Richard Haldane continued. That is to say, we are in the Southeast Theatre, and I'm afraid we will be defeated. Richard Haldane nodded. Yes, Your Excellency Prime Minister. Judging from the current situation, the possibility of our victory is very small. The German offensive is too strong, and our losses are too great. Southeast Asia, the troops in the theatre are now in crisis. So, can they be withdrawn to London? Churchill asked. Since the British Army is doomed to fail in the Southeast Theatre, in Churchill's view, it is better to withdraw the troops immediately to preserve their strength. Your Excellency, I'm afraid it will be very difficult to withdraw. The connection between Canterbury and London has been cut off, unless we send troops to reconnect. However, the troops sent may also be deeply involved and cause our losses further rise. In that case, not only will we not be able to rescue the troops in the Southeast Theatre, but we will also lose more troops. This will cause major problems for our defense in London, Richard Haldane said. Churchill nodded. He knew what Richard Haldane said was very reasonable. With no hope of victory in the Southeast Theatre, it is undoubtedly necessary to strengthen London's defenses. Otherwise, once the German army wins in the Southeast Theatre, it will soon take London. Your Excellency Prime Minister, we now have no extra troops to reinforce the Southeast Theatre. The troops around London are constructing fortifications nervously. In order to resist the most likely German attack on London, we must do everything well. All you have to do is prepare. Otherwise, the unfavorable battle in the Southeast Theater will repeat itself again. Richard Haldane said. Well, Your Excellency, Minister of War, I respect your opinion. However, we still have so many troops in the Southeast Theater. It would be a pity if we just give up like this. If possible, let as many troops as possible withdraw to London. I think that will also be very helpful for us to hold London. Churchill said. Yes, Your Excellency Prime Minister. I will order the troops in the Southeast Theater to find ways to break through as much as possible. Richard Haldane said. Churchill nodded and said nothing more. When Richard Haldane ordered the troops in the Southeast Theater to find a chance to break through by themselves, the expressions of General Hamilton and others changed drastically. They cursed Richard Haldane's order one after another. Under such a situation, if they could retreat on their own, they would not wait anxiously for London to send reinforcement. If you retreat now, you can certainly withdraw part of the troops. However, the rest of the main force will definitely be wiped out by the German army. At that time, the British army will suffer unprecedented losses. Once the British army is defeated in the Southeast Theater, can they still resist the German attack in London? In this regard, the frontline generals of the British army will never believe it. Richard Haldane, does that guy want to disregard the lives of so many of our troops? If we are wiped out by the Germans, he won't even try to hold London. Admiral Hamilton cursed. Your Excellency, Commander, it is obvious that we have been abandoned. Your Excellency the Minister of War believes that we have become a burden. If reinforcements are sent to us, it will only further increase the loss. Therefore, he wants to let us fend for ourselves. Yes. Admiral Haig looked angry. Short-sighted guy. Even if he builds a strong fortification in London, it is impossible to withstand the German attack. What he has done will harm the British Empire. Admiral Hamilton said through gritted teeth. After seeing the powerful strength of the German army, General Hamilton finally had a clear understanding. Chapter 802, Surprise Attack. Marshal, the First Army and the Second Army have already gained the absolute upper hand in the battle around Canterbury. The main force of the British army has been defeated by us in the battle. A large number of British troops who have no fighting spirit have even become organized surrender to us. If this continues, we will eliminate all the British troops gathered around Canterbury in a short time. Lieutenant General Ludendorff, acting commander of the 8th Army, said. Marshal von Falkenhayn nodded. The situation of the war is developing towards a very favorable side of the German army. This satisfied him. Because, as long as the German army can win this great war, then the German army will be one step closer to victory in the British mainland war. What if the British continue to invest troops in Canterbury? Don't forget, they still have more than 1 million troops in London and surrounding areas. Marshal von Falkenhayn said. Yes, Your Excellency the Marshal. The British have an absolute advantage in terms of military strength. If they continue to invest in reinforcement, it will make the battle more difficult. However, it only makes us feel difficult. At most, it will cost more. With a little more time and a little more price, we can win this battle. Lieutenant General Ludendorff was very confident of winning. Marshal von Falkenhayn is equally confident. General Ludendorff, you and your soldiers, I'm afraid you can't hold back anymore? Marshal von Falkenhayn asked. Lieutenant General Ludendorff smiled and then nodded. Yes, Marshal. The departments on the front line are winning, and we can only watch from the sidelines. This feeling is indeed very uncomfortable. In addition, I also think that the 8th Legion is ready for battle. Oh. What are you going to do? Marshal von Falkenhayn asked. Your Excellency Marshal, the 1st Army and 2nd Army are currently holding back the main force of the British Army around Canterbury. As long as we continue to fight according to the plan, the British Army there will be eliminated soon. But, don't forget at Maidstone, there are hundreds of thousands of British troops. Although the 3rd Army is attacking, it will be difficult to wipe out this British Army. Once they withdraw to London, this will give us the next attack on London. The attack caused a lot of trouble. Therefore, I think that at this time, the 8th Army can land in the UK, cooperate with the 3rd Army, to launch an attack on the British Army gathered in Maidstone, and eat them in one fell swoop. If it can be successful, not only can it eliminate hundreds of thousands of British troops, but it can also greatly deter the British troops in London, making them afraid to act rashly. In this way, we will soon be able to win the victory in the southeast of England. Ludendorff, the Lieutenant General, analyzed. Marshal von Falkenhayn thought for a while, then nodded. General Ludendorff, this is indeed a very good plan. Eating the British army entrenched in Maidstone will allow the British army to the troops of the army are afraid to send reinforcement to Canterbury. At the same time, it can also weaken the strength of the British army to the greatest extent. Yes, Your Excellency the Marshal. Well, let's do it according to your plan. Marshal von Falkenhayn said. Yes, Your Excellency the Marshal. The 8th Army is ready, and they can board the ship tonight. Tomorrow morning, they can land in Eastbourne. Lieutenant General Ludendorff said. He and the soldiers of the 8th Army didn't want to wait any longer. Well, I will let the Navy fully assist you. Marshal von Falkenhayn said. Yes, Marshal. Lieutenant General Ludendorff was very excited. He and the 8th Army are finally going to the battlefield, and he believes that the 8th Army will definitely be able to create another glories. The 8th Army has won one victory after another, whether it is on the Eastern Front or the Western Front. On the British battlefield, they can also win. On the night of September 3rd, a large number of transport ships assembled in Ketwaya. The German 8th Army has been staying around. After receiving the order, a large number of troops began to board the ship. The 4th Division of the German Marine Corps will cooperate with the 8th Army to land in Eastbourne. After that, the main force of the 8th Army will quickly approach Maidstone from Eastbourne and cooperate with the 3rd Army to eliminate the 3rd Army and the 8th Army of the British Army. At this moment, the main force of the British Army has already assembled in places such as the South East Theatre and London. In other areas, there are not many troops at all. For example, in Eastbourne, the British Army only deployed one infantry brigade, with more than 4,000 people. It is almost impossible to prevent the landing of the German army. At 6 AM on September 4th, 5 King-class battleships and 5 Kaiser Frederick III-class battleships of the German Navy appeared off the coast of Eastbourne. Subsequently, these warships poured shells on Eastbourne against Caesar. German intelligence agencies have long since found out the British barracks and other fortifications in Eastbourne. This allowed German warships to fire directly on these areas. When the sound of the guns sounded, and one after another large caliber naval gun smashed directly into the British barracks, the British army woke up like a dream. Boom. 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 Among the violent explosions, countless panicked British soldiers rushed out of the barracks in disheveled clothes, and more British soldiers were killed directly in their sleep. Under the cover of the powerful firepower of the German Navy, the 4th Marine Division launched a landing operation. The British Army, which suffered heavy losses, could not have any impact on the German landing operations. The German Marines succeeded with only one attack. The British troops stationed in Eastbourne were quickly defeated and fled Eastbourne. They didn't even have time to blow up the port, leaving the port intact in the hands of the Germans. Immediately, the 4th Division and the 8th Army of the German Marine Corps were able to use the port facilities in Eastbourne to disembark quickly, especially for heavy artillery and tanks. Without professional port facilities, the disembarkation speed will be very slow. However, everything is not a problem now. The tank was hoisted from the transport ship to the dock by a crane, and then drove away directly. The heavy artillery was also directly towered away by the truck, very fast. In the evening of that day, the 8th Armored Division and 2 infantry divisions of the German 8th Army formed an assault force, starting from Eastbourne, and advancing along the road to Maidstone. The rest of the troops are also disembarking quickly. It is estimated that in a maximum of 1 or 2 days, all the troops of the 8th Army can land on the British mainland. Chapter 803, War Situation Erosion. From Eastbourne to Maidstone, the straight line distance is only 30 kilometers. Even if you choose to take a detour to avoid climbing, the distance is only 60 kilometers. Fully armed troops, it takes 2 days. However, for an armored force advancing along the road at high speed, 60 kilometers is nothing at all. The 8th Armored Division of the German 8th Army, as well as the 2 infantry divisions drawn out, concentrated a large number of trucks, allowing soldiers to advance in this way, the marching time can be greatly reduced. That night, the German 8th Armored Division raided Crawley, and a British infantry brigade stationed here fled. After that, the 8th Armored Division and 2 infantry divisions approached Maidstone overnight. By daybreak, the 8th Armored Division had captured Aylesford, northwest of Maidstone. The British 3rd Army and 8th Army were surrounded by the German 3rd Army, and 8th Army performance of the German 8th Army immediately blinded the British. It only took one day and one night from the landing of the 8th Army to the lightning-fast entry into the battle. However, this made the British pay a heavy price for it. The two group armies, with more than 400,000 people, became the turtle in the urn. Maidstone, the headquarters of the British 3rd Army. When General Gough, the commander of the army group, learned that Aylesford had fallen into the hands of the German army, he was dumbfounded, as if he had been struck by a bolt from the blue. Didn't the Germans just land in Eastbourne yesterday? Why did they take down Aylesford this morning? Could it be that taking down the Germans won't make it fly? Admiral Gough exclaimed. General, the Germans occupied Crawley last night. Obviously they did not rest and marched overnight, so they were able to occupy Aylesford this morning. How many Germans troops occupied Aylesford? Admiral Gough asked quickly. If the Germans were not too numerous, it might be possible to recapture Aylesford and withdraw from there. General, there are only more than 50,000 people. However, more than 200 tanks are included. Admiral Gough's complexion suddenly turned black like the bottom of a pot. Familiar with the establishment of the German army, he knew that it must be the 8th Armored Division of the German army. Damn it, it's a dead end this time. The most elite armored troops of the Germans have already appeared. It is almost impossible to recapture Aylesford. Admiral Gough looked desperate. On the French battlefield, the 5th Army of the Expeditionary Force under his command was hit by the 8th Army of the German army and suffered heavy losses. This left a very deep impression on him. Unexpectedly, on the British battlefield, I encountered the German 8th Army again. This made General Gough subconsciously fear the German 8th Army. However, Admiral Gough then realized that if Aylesford was not recaptured, he would really be dead. Therefore, no matter how powerful the 8th Army is, he still has to bite the bullet, organize troops immediately, and launch an attack on Aylesford. In any case, we must defeat the Germans and take it back. Otherwise, we are dead. Also, send a telegram to the theater command and the War Department. We need reinforcement. Admiral Gough ordered. Yes, General. After the British 3rd Army launched its offensive, they were greeted by the powerful firepower of the German 8th Army. Although marching overnight made the troops very tired, the soldiers were still gnashing their teeth. Coupled with the fact that the Army Air Force dispatched a large number of planes to provide fire support to them, almost every attack by the British Army will be bombed indiscriminately. The attack of the British 3rd Army had no effect at all except for the corpses left on the ground and heavy losses. At the same time, the German 3rd Army also launched a fierce attack on Maidstone. After the rear of the British Army was blocked, General Howson, the commander of the 3rd Army, naturally did not have to worry about the British fleeing. Under the pincer attack of the two German armies, the fate of the British 3rd Army and 8th Army was undoubtedly doomed. The British 3rd Army and 8th Army are in crisis, which makes the situation in the southeastern theatre of the United Kingdom even more unfavourable to the British Army. 1st Army, 2nd Army, 6th Army, 7th Army and 9th Army have been completely suppressed by the German 1st Army and 2nd Army, and suffered heavy losses under the German attack. Now the 3rd Army and the 8th Army are about to be wiped out. Once the German 3rd Army and 8th Army went to Canterbury, they were even more dead. The Germans did not only invest 3 legions in the British mainland, but the 8th Army has already appeared. Perhaps more legions will land in the British mainland soon. In this battle, it is very difficult for us to defeat the Germans. Great. Admiral Hamilton was completely desperate. Yes, Your Excellency Commander. The 7 armies in the southeast theatre are about to be destroyed. Even if London still has a few armies, it is impossible to hold on to the German attack. Once London falls, our main force will also be completely wiped out. At that time, we will no longer be able to stop the German army. The whole of Britain will be occupied by the Germans. Admiral Haig appeared even more pessimistic. Damn. If London had sent troops to meet us earlier, maybe we would have been able to withdraw the main force to London. Now, it is too late to say anything. Admiral Hamilton said angrily. The British Third Army and Eighth Army are already overwhelmed. The troops assembled in Canterbury suffered heavy losses under the fierce German attack and had no fighting spirit. Under such circumstances, it is simply impossible to confront the German army. Your Excellency, Commander, give an order to break through. It is only one that can be withdrawn. It is better than losing everything here, Admiral Benson suggested. General Hamilton nodded, although he knew that after the order to break out, many troops would probably surrender directly to the Germans. However, this is the only way to do it when there is no other way. As Admiral Benson said, being able to pull back one is one. Immediately, General Hamilton issued an order for the entire army to break through. Hundreds of thousands of British troops began to break out in the direction of London. Although, they were intercepted by the German army. However, the disadvantage of too few German troops still had a great impact on this battle. Many British troops took advantage of the loopholes in the German defense line to escape the blockade and fled back to London. Chapter 804, Approaching London. On the position of the German 2nd Infantry Division, general-purpose machine guns and squad machine guns were roaring, and dense bullets enveloped the British army like a storm. The attacking British soldiers have already left a thick layer of corpses in front of their defense line. In the sky, several German H-1 bombers flew by, and bombs fell like raindrops. Boom. 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 The explosion sounded in the queue of the British army, and many British soldiers were blown away, and their fragile bodies were like fallen leaves. In order to evacuate Canterbury, the British army launched a fierce attack on the German defense line. However, none of them could successfully break through the German defense line and retreat to London. Most of the British soldiers either fell under the powerful firepower of the German army, or raised their hands and surrendered to the German army. In the absence of any hope, for many people, keeping their own lives is undoubtedly the most important thing. As for the others, they can be temporarily abandoned. When the German Third Army and Eighth Army joined forces to solve the British Third Army and Eighth Army and joined the British attack on Canterbury, the British could no longer flee back to London. Under such circumstances, the remaining British troops surrendered one after another, and the Battle of Canterbury came to an end. The result of the Battle of Canterbury ended with a disastrous defeat of the British Army. Of the 7 group armies assembled by the British Army in the Southeast Theatre, more than 1.4 million people, less than 200,000 fled back to London. The rest either died on the battlefield, or went into German prisoner of war camps. The German army's 4 legions plus 5 marine divisions totaled more than 1.1 million people, and less than 50,000 people were seriously injured or killed. Compared with their victories, such losses are undoubtedly much smaller. After winning the Battle of Canterbury, the German army did not immediately attack London, but took a short rest. The British army is already in full swing in London, and it would be meaningless to launch an attack immediately at this time. It's better to let the tired soldiers take a break and replenish their combat supplies. Especially technical weapons such as tanks suffer great losses in battle. Many tanks lost to technical failures could be repaired, as long as replacement parts arrived. The German combat command against Britain also moved from Calais to Dover. The commander, Marshal von Falkenhayn, also set foot on British territory. Everyone, His Majesty the Emperor is very satisfied with the victory on the front line. In this battle, we wiped out the main force of the British army at a small price. Although there are nearly 3 million British troops left. However, the real elite there are not many more. It is impossible to resist our army's attack. Marshal von Falkenhayn's face was full of smiles. Of course, the battle against Britain has just begun. However, Marshal von Falkenhayn believed that they would be able to make persistent efforts and defeat the British in a very short period of time. Several Legion commanders are also very happy. The victory at the Battle of Canterbury can be regarded as a complete victory. Next, just take London and wipe out the remaining main force of the British army around London. Then, the war against Britain can be regarded as a victory. Your Excellency, Marshal, when will we launch an attack on London? Although, the British have assembled 1.2 million people in London. However, the elite is not as good as the southeast of England. With our current strength, winning London will be a sure thing. Admiral Crook said. The British Army deployed only 6 armies in London, namely the 4th Army, the 5th Army, the 10th Army, the 11th Army, the 12th Army and the 13th Army. For a long time in the past, the only job of the more than 1 million British troops was to frantically build defensive positions in and around London. Every road, every street or every house was regarded by them as an important stronghold against the German attack. British War Secretary Richard Haldane is determined to build London into a fortress. Richard Haldane knew very well that it was almost impossible to rely on more than 1 million British troops to resist the powerful German army. Their only way is to strengthen the defense as much as possible and use these fortifications to consume the vital strength of the German army. In this case, there may be a chance of success. Of course, after such a war, London will inevitably be reduced to ruins. But no one cares anymore. If it cannot withstand the German attack, the whole of Britain will fall. Rather than that, it would be better to destroy London and leave a ruin to the Germans. If God blesses them, and they resisted the German attack in London, perhaps the war situation will develop in favor of Britain. At worst, a decent peace can be had for less. This is very necessary for the UK. In addition, the British deployed a large number of mines at the Thames estuary, which has completely blocked it. Therefore, it is impossible for the warships of the German Navy to bombard London. This made the German army lose an important boost when it attacked London, and could only rely on the army's own artillery and air support. In order to reduce the casualties when attacking London, the German army will definitely spend a lot of shells when attacking London. Therefore, Marshal von Falkenhayn hoped that when the attack began, he would be fully prepared. Don't worry about the attack on London. London is there, and he can't escape. It is obviously impossible for the British to give up London and hand it over to us. Therefore, we can rest for a few days before launching an attack. The previous battles consumed a lot of combat supplies of the troops. We also need to use this time to replenish them. Marshal von Falkenhayn said. Admiral Crook nodded, and he also knew that the current troops really need time to rest. Gentlemen, the attack on London is very important. Whether we can quickly take the whole of Britain depends on whether we can destroy the last main force of the British Army in London. Therefore, I hope that we will not only capture London, but also the main force of the British Army will be wiped out here, said Marshal von Falkenhayn. Yes, Your Excellency the Marshal. Everyone replied. The rest of the German army lasted for a full week. After that, the German army began to attack London. On September 12th, the 4 armies of the German army divided into 4 groups and marched towards London. The huge army of millions of people have the potential to eat up all the British troops gathered around London. Chapter 805. The King runs away. London, the capital of the United Kingdom, was once the most prosperous city in the world. As the capital of the world's hegemony, the British Empire, London can be called the center of the world. Sadly, those days are long gone. The powerful British Empire collapsed in this war, which directly made London less prosperous. Even when the war was about to break out here, the whole of London had become jittery. Residents living in London have already fled away. Except for those who really had nowhere to escape, everyone who could escape has already escaped. The rest are almost old, weak, sick and disabled. Millions of troops entered London and its surrounding areas. They are constructing fortifications in full swing every day, almost turning the whole of London into a huge construction site. The labor of millions of soldiers is still very fruitful. At least, London has completely changed under their efforts. The bustling streets were dug with potholes, and there were barricades and firepower points everywhere. The windows of many buildings were also sandbagged. Once in battle, but not destroyed by enemy artillery, these buildings will serve as commanding heights. Deploying a single machine gun can seal off a large area, causing great casualties to the enemy. It can be said that London has completely become a city of war and a city of soldiers. The people here have only one idea, that is to defeat the Germans and hold London in the upcoming war. Of course, it is very difficult to say whether it will be realized. Buckingham Palace, as the most magnificent British royal palace, is also in a state of tension and panic. The palace guards were on guard, as if an enemy would attack them at any moment. Of course, these palace guards are just for show. Dressed in gorgeous costumes, their true combat power is not as good as those veterans who survived the battlefield. In addition, if even these palace guards need to go to the battlefield, then the battle situation has developed to an extremely unfavorable situation for Britain. A car with the sign of the Prime Minister's office drove into the Huanjin Palace. After the car stabilized, Prime Minister Winston Churchill and War Secretary Richard Haldane got out of the car. The expressions on the faces of both of them were very dignified, as if someone owed them money and hadn't paid it back. "Your Excellencies, Your Majesty is waiting for you in the office," said the waiter. Churchill and Richard Haldane nodded and went straight to King George V's office. "Good afternoon, Your Majesty." Churchill and Richard Haldane greeted respectfully. Although the king no longer has any real power, however, it still has a high prestige among the people. This made these senior cabinet officials still behave respectfully and humbly in front of the king. "Your Excellency, please sit down," King George V said. His Majesty the King looked very tired. His eyes were bloodshot. Obviously he hadn't rested for a long time. In fact, after the German army landed on the British mainland, King George V began to worry. Although he knew that the possibility of the British army resisting the German attack was very small, but he still hoped for a miracle. It's just that God doesn't seem to favor the British anymore. Not only did the miracle not happen, but the bad news of the British Army's fiasco was weighted. "Your Excellency, Prime Minister, Your Excellency, Minister of War. The German attack on London will begin soon, right? We are here. Can we resist the German attack?" King George V seems to have stopped reporting anything. "Confidence, Your Majesty, we will do our best to hold London. Over the past few months, we have been strengthening London's defenses. Now we have seen initial results," Churchill said. "So, is it possible that we can withstand the German attack?" King George V asked. "Your Majesty, this may be very difficult. The Germans' offensive power on the battlefield has far exceeded our expectations. Of course, we can use fortifications to attack the Germans, but whether we can succeed is undoubtedly a question." "Hard to say," Richard Haldane said. After the disastrous defeat at the Battle of Canterbury, the morale and confidence of the British Army have been severely damaged. This made Richard Haldane not have much confidence in the next battle. Is the British Empire destined to be destroyed this time? King George V couldn't help but sigh. George V felt very aggrieved. Why was his luck so bad? When other people were kings, the British Empire dominated the quartet, constantly expanding its territory. None of the other countries in the world dared to confront the British Empire. It was his turn to be the king, but the British Empire fell straight from the peak to the trough, without even a transition period. Now, the enemy has landed on the British mainland, which has not been done for hundreds of years. The British Empire was already facing an existential crisis. If it doesn't work out, the destruction of the British Empire is just around the corner. "Your Majesty, even if London falls, or the whole of Britain falls, the British Empire will not be destroyed. We will continue to persevere." Churchill's eyes flashed with determination. Even though the current situation is very unfavorable to Britain, Churchill is still confident that they can win the final victory. "Your Majesty, we have prepared everything in Canada. Your Excellency the Foreign Minister has arrived in Canada first, and we have reached an agreement with the Americans. If the mainland falls, we will go to Canada to continue fighting. The United States will give us the greatest support. In this war, we may fail. However, in the next war, we may not have a chance to defeat the Germans. As long as we can defeat the Germans in the next war, the British Empire still has a chance to revive," Churchill said. "Canada?" George V frowned. Although Canada has a vast territory, other conditions are too poor. George V obviously believed that it would undoubtedly be very difficult to rely on Canada to revive the British Empire. "Your Majesty, the Germans are about to launch an attack on London. We hope that Your Majesty can leave London and go to Canada. Only in this way can His Majesty's safety be guaranteed. At the same time, when the situation is not good for us, he can also lead the subjects of the Empire. Keep fighting," Churchill continued. George V was a little hesitant. Although he was afraid of death, he also didn't want to flee the British mainland. After leaving the British mainland, is he still a king? However, after careful consideration, King George V nodded and agreed to leave England. Chapter 806, Gold Transfer. "Your Excellency Prime Minister, Can the Americans really be reliable? I'm always a little worried. King George V said. Although he has decided to flee the UK and fled to Canada. However, he had to think about the future. He would certainly like to return to England someday, if possible. Your Majesty, the Americans are of course unreliable. In fact, we in the United States are just using each other. After the fall of the empire, the United States has become the only opponent of the Germans. As long as the Americans do not want to be defeated in the confrontation with Germany, they have to find a way to strengthen their own strength. The United States has a vast territory, a huge population resource and a huge industrial output value. However, they also have many shortcomings. The biggest shortcoming is science and technology. The gap with Germany. With the help of the empire, the Americans can quickly shorten the gap with the Germans in this respect. But if we want to defeat the Germans, it is very difficult to rely on our own strength, must rely on the strength of the Americans. Therefore, we also need to spare no effort to strengthen the strength of the Americans. Churchill explained. George V nodded. So, Your Excellency, after we defeat the Germans in the future, can the British Empire maintain its status as the world's hegemon? Britain has been the world's hegemon for hundreds of years. If the hegemony is lost from his hands, George V will not know how to explain to the kings who fought for the rise of the British Empire all their lives. Your Majesty, I'm afraid that the supremacy cannot be maintained. Churchill said. George V's eyes suddenly flashed a trace of sadness, even though he had already guessed that this would be the result. However, hearing Churchill say it so clearly still made him feel a little uncomfortable. Your Majesty, this is inevitable. Since the Empire lost this war, it is impossible to keep our hegemony. Even if we use the power of the Americans to defeat Germany, the new hegemon will be the United States. However, the situation of the Empire will be much better. According to our agreement with the Americans, we can retain most of the colonies. Especially important colonies such as India and South Africa can be preserved. In that case, the Empire will still have the opportunity to rise. If we are lucky and can seize the opportunity, we may not have the opportunity to become the world's hegemon again in the future. Churchill explained. George V nodded. Churchill's explanation satisfied him. Although, the British Empire is destined to lose its hegemony next. But as long as they keep their homeland and most of their colonies, they will always have a chance to rise. Maybe in a few decades, they will be able to rise again. Well, Your Excellency the Prime Minister, I fully support the Cabinet's decision. I believe that for the British Empire, the difficulties are temporary. We will definitely overcome this difficulty and bring the British Empire back to the pinnacle of the world. George V said firmly. Your Majesty, I fully believe this too. Churchill also had a firm expression on his face. Your Majesty, no matter what, Canada's infrastructure is terrible. After we arrive in Canada, we need to carry out large-scale construction. In addition, we need an armed army. These require a lot of money. Even in the future, we will have to do something to counterattack the mainland. Prepare. It is obviously not enough to rely on Canada's tax revenue alone. Churchill continued. George V was also a smart man. When Churchill said that, he immediately understood what Churchill meant. The finances of the current British Empire have already collapsed. If you want to achieve re-emergence, you need a lot of money. And Churchill's purpose was nothing more than to focus on the wealth of the British royal family. The British Empire has been the world hegemon for hundreds of years, and the wealth accumulated by the royal family is also very amazing. Gold alone has accumulated thousands of tons. Including other treasures, the wealth accumulated by the royal family may exceed tens of billions of pounds. It's just that these wealth are gold, silver and jewelry. It is very difficult and time consuming to turn them into money. Therefore, when the British Empire was in danger, these wealth could not be directly turned into weapons and equipment. However, if you can escape to Canada, you can gradually realize these wealth, and then use the money to build Canada and arm the remaining troops. Your Excellency, the British Empire has reached this point. As the King of the British Empire, I'm naturally responsible for revitalizing the empire. After arriving in Canada, I can lend the royal family's wealth to the government in the form of an interest-free loan. After defeating Germany, it will be returned to the royal family slowly. George V said. It would be impossible for King George V to donate such a large amount of wealth to the government. Even if he agrees, the rest of the royal family won't either. If it is a loan to the government, then there is no problem. Anyway, everything is used to revive the British Empire. Yes, Your Majesty the King. Churchill nodded, already very satisfied with the result. With the support of the royal family's large wealth, they will soon be able to rebuild a strong industry and army in Canada. At that time, these will become an important boost for them to defeat Germany and become a world power again. The British royal family has a lot of wealth, which is scattered all over the UK for the sake of confidentiality. It is not an easy task to transfer these wealth to Canada. This is especially true when the German Navy has almost blocked the entire United Kingdom. In order to transport these wealth away, Churchill specially set up a gold transfer committee, which is directly responsible to him. The sole responsibility of this committee is to safely transport the wealth of the royal family and the British government to Canada. The wealth of the royal family is amazing, and the British government also has a lot of wealth. Especially the gold and other precious metals stored in the bank vaults must be transported away. If it falls into the hands of the Germans, Germany will become stronger because of this wealth. At that time, it will undoubtedly be much more difficult for Britain to defeat Germany. Under Churchill's order, this department quickly operated. The army, navy, and intelligence agencies are all fully cooperating with them. A large amount of gold and other wealth were transported from secret warehouses in various places, and then secretly transported to port cities, and then transported to Canada through warships, submarines, and other ships. Chapter 807. Can't leave it to the British. The capital of Germany, Berlin. Now Berlin already looks like the capital of a world hegemon. Although, in the past, Berlin was one of the famous big cities in the world. However, it is far from being comparable to London and Paris. Paris has been destroyed in the flames of war, and London is about to be bombed into ruins. This will make Berlin the largest and most prosperous city in Europe. It is estimated that only New York can compare with it. Although the war is not over yet, Germany's victory in this war is already a certainty. This will make Germany destined to become the future world hegemon. As the capital of the world's hegemony, Berlin will certainly gain a lot of color because of this. It is only a matter of time before it becomes the world's politics and financial center. The impact of the war has begun to decline. Although the battle against Britain still requires a large number of troops. For this reason, it is also necessary to consume a large amount of war materials. However, with the arrival of a large amount of war reparations from France and Italy, as well as a large amount of resources and food crops obtained from the occupied areas, this has gradually allowed Germany to get rid of the influence of the war. People's living standards will also continue to improve. This makes their support for the emperor and the government of the empire also continue to rise. In another time and space, Germany lost the war, causing the country to collapse. However, in this time and space, everything is different. Germany won the war, not only avoiding the collapse of the empire, but also developing stronger because of it. Imperial Palace, the office of Emperor Qin Tian. Your Majesty, according to the information we have received, the British already intend to abandon their homeland. They are secretly transferring their wealth to Canada. Admiral Feng Barlaming, director of the Imperial Intelligence Bureau, reported. Qin Tian nodded. It is completely understandable for the British to evacuate the mainland after they found that the mainland could not be defended. Qin Tian didn't expect to conquer the British mainland, so he let the British bow their heads and surrender. The British are used to being the hegemons of the world. Even if they lose in this war, they will definitely not just bow their heads and admit defeat. At least some of them will not lower their noble heads, such as the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and the British royal family. Qin Tian only hopes that, after taking over the British mainland, Germany will be able to establish a solid line of defense in the eastern Atlantic Ocean. At least the enemies of the German Empire will not be allowed to use the British mainland as a bridgehead to counterattack the European continent. In addition, after losing their homeland, even if the British continued to resist, they would not be able to turn up any big waves. Pay close attention to the actions of the British. They must not be allowed to transport that wealth to Canada. Qin Tian said. Yes, Your Majesty. Admiral Feng Barlaming nodded. Subsequently, Qin Tian summoned Marshal von Tirpitz, Minister of the Imperial Navy, to intercept the wealth of the British. At this stage only the Navy can do it. Your Majesty, the wealth accumulated by the British Empire over hundreds of years is quite astonishing. There is no amount of gold alone. Those wealth cannot be transported to Canada. Marshal Earl Tirpitz immediately said. Qin Tian nodded. However, although we have blocked the UK, there are actually many loopholes in the blockade. If the British secretly transport the wealth away, we really have nothing to do with them. Britain's coastline is long and tortuous, and the German Navy can only complete a general blockade. It is almost impossible to completely block Britain, especially at night. The current Navy's night combat capability is quite poor. Coupled with the restricted line of sight, the British can easily find loopholes and break through the blockade of the German army. Among other things, if the British use destroyers to transport the wealth and set off at night, it will undoubtedly be very difficult to catch the British. What's more, the British also have a lot of submarines. Although the performance of those submarines is far inferior to that of the German Navy, it is also not easy to find and sink those submarines. Those submarines can also be used to transport the gold. Therefore, it is undoubtedly very difficult to intercept the British and prevent the British from transporting those wealth to Canada. Your Majesty, even if we send more warships to further strengthen the blockade against Britain, it will not have much effect. The British can use destroyers and submarines to transport them. It is unlikely that we will successfully intercept them. Till Marshal Earl Pitts looked a little frustrated. The wealth of the British is undoubtedly mouth-watering. If Germany can get this batch of wealth, its national strength will be further improved. At the same time, it can also greatly weaken the United Kingdom. Otherwise, once the British successfully transported this batch of wealth to Canada, they would quickly develop again. Although it will not pose a fatal threat to Germany, it is still no problem to make trouble for Germany. I know that it is almost impossible to completely stop the British. What we can do is to intercept the wealth of the British as much as possible. It is naturally the best if we can asterisk it from the British. However, if you can't grab it, just sink it directly. Sinking into the sea is better than falling into the hands of the British. Qin Tian said. Yes, Your Majesty. Marshal Earl Tirpitz nodded. General Blemming, the intelligence department should focus on searching for relevant information. It is best to be able to determine when the British will transport the gold, whether to use destroyers or submarines, which route to take, etc. If this is the case, we will arrange warships to carry out the interception. The possibility of success is naturally much greater. Qin Tian said. Yes, Your Majesty. The intelligence department will do its best. Admiral Feng Ba-Laming nodded. Although he knows this is a very difficult task, the British will keep the news about the gold transshipment strictly confidential. However, no matter how difficult it is, you have to find a way to complete it. It is very important to intercept the gold of the British. In addition, the Navy can dispatch aircraft carriers to the Atlantic Ocean. The patrol radius of carrier-based aircraft is much larger than that of warships. Once a suspicious ship is found, immediately call the warship to intercept it, or launch an attack directly. The efficiency is also better than simply it is much higher to use warships. Qin Tian suggested. Yes, Your Majesty, I will arrange it. Marshal Earl Tirpitz nodded. For the benefit of the Empire, we must stop the British. The gold cannot be allowed to be brought to Canada. If the Empire can't get it, it will be sunk directly, and no one can get it. Qin Tian said solemnly. Chapter 808, Secret Mission. Late at night on September 8th, Liverpool, an important city in Western England. On a blocked military pier, a destroyer is moored here. Following the lights on the pier, soldiers were loading boxes of bulky things onto the destroyer. A middle-aged man in a suit was talking to a captain officer. Captain John, you must safely transport these items to Canada. This is related to the future of the British Empire. The middle-aged man looked serious. Yes, sir, I will do my best. Captain John nodded. He is the captain of the destroyer named Lancaster. Among the many destroyers of the British Royal Navy, this destroyer has a very strong performance. The displacement has reached thousands of tons, and the maximum speed is as high as 35 knots. We have prepared supplies for you in Iceland. After the battleship arrives there, you can replenish fuel and fresh water, and then sail all the way to Canada without stopping. Arriving in Canada safely is the greatest victory. God will bless you," said the middle-aged man. "Sir, my luck has always been good. This time, I believe I will be able to reach Canada safely," Captain John said with a smile. Soon, all the goods were loaded onto the warship. "Sir, it's almost time. I have to go," Captain John said. The middle-aged man nodded. Captain John played on the warship. The destroyer Lancaster launched, and the battleship slowly withdrew from the pier, turned around and sailed into the Irish Sea. They need to enter the Atlantic Ocean before dawn, and then sail westward at high speed to reach Canada. Of course, if they encounter a German warship on the way, they have to make a detour to escape. Although the performance of the destroyer Lancaster is good, it is nothing more than a destroyer. The 114mm naval gun is obviously unable to confront the German battleship. Once you encounter a battleship of the German Navy, you will only have to escape for your life. However, with a speed of up to 35 knots, the destroyer Lancaster has a little more possibility of escaping. It is not so easy for the battleships or cruisers of the German Navy to catch up. The destroyer Lancaster transported 100 tons of gold, which was worth more than £15 million. Moreover, it is still the value of the pound before the large-scale depreciation. After the gold arrives in Canada, it will become an important fund for the rise of Britain in Canada. Of course, this 100 tons of gold is only a small part of Britain's huge wealth. They had still more gold and other riches waiting to be shipped to Canada by various means. As soon as the destroyer Lancaster left the port, a telegram was sent from a poor area in Liverpool. In the telegram, the departure time and route of the destroyer Lancaster were clearly marked. In order to intercept the wealth that the British are about to ship to Canada, the German intelligence agency has spent a lot of money. Many intelligence personnel who have been lurking for many years have been activated to search for relevant information. In addition, the current war situation is very unfavorable to Britain, which makes many British people desperate, and they are naturally willing to cooperate with Germany. This allowed German intelligence agencies to finally grasp the information. On the Atlantic Ocean, the German Navy responded immediately. The battle cruiser Blucher, with 2 light cruisers and 6 destroyers, formed a hunting fleet, preparing to encircle and suppress the destroyer Lancaster. The order they received was that it would be best if they could force the destroyer Lancaster to surrender. If it doesn't work, it will be sunk. It would be better for the gold to sink into the Atlantic than for the British to ship it safely to Canada. Besides, after sinking into the Atlantic Ocean, Germany can organize salvage forces to salvage it, and maybe it can be salvaged. At dawn on the morning of September 9th, the destroyer Lancaster had already entered the Atlantic Ocean. The heart that Captain John had been hanging on for a long time finally returned to his stomach. The Atlantic Ocean is vast and boundless. As long as warships enter the Atlantic Ocean, it will be very difficult for the German Navy to find them again. After all, in the era when there were no reconnaissance satellites, searching for warships at sea was like finding a needle in a haystack. "Captain, what exactly are we transporting this time? So mysterious?" an officer asked curiously. "Shut up, don't ask more questions than you should. This is a secret of the Empire," Captain John said with a straight face. Immediately, the officer had no choice but to say no more. Of course, the curiosity in my heart must be indispensable. On the entire warship, except for Captain John, no one else knew what they were transporting. This is undoubtedly for secrecy. The value of 100 tons of gold is astonishing. It is already possible to build several of the latest capital ships. Therefore, Captain John naturally knew how important this mission was. At 7 o'clock in the morning, the destroyer Lancaster continued to sail. Captain John was very tired after staying up all night. After he explained a few words to the navigator, he went to the captain's cabin to rest. 10 minutes later, a seaplane flew from the northern sky. After discovering this seaplane, the British naval officers and soldiers on the destroyer Lancaster felt as if they were facing a big enemy. The navigator ordered the warship to turn, and at the same time, sent someone to call Captain John. Captain John was woken up just after falling asleep, which made him very annoyed. However, the current situation could no longer allow him to get angry. "Damn, why is the German seaplane here? Has our whereabouts been exposed? Captain John cursed. The mission they performed this time was a secret mission, and the level of secrecy was very high. It stands to reason that it is unlikely that the news will be leaked. However, the German seaplanes continued appeared, which undoubtedly explained the problem. "Captain, what should we do now?" asked the navigator. Captain John frowned and thought for a while, and then said, "The battleship to move forward. Pay close attention to the surrounding sea area, and once you find a German ship, turn immediately." It was just the seaplanes of the Germans, which did not pose much threat to them. However, Captain John knew that other warships of the German Navy must be on their way. Captain John's guess is not wrong. The German fleet is indeed operating in this sea area. After receiving the report from the seaplane, the fleet immediately approached the destroyer Lancaster. Especially those destroyers have already increased their speed to the maximum. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 809, Leave the Gold. Captain John frowned tightly, and as time passed, his mood became more and more serious. He had a faint feeling that news of their secret mission this time had been leaked. Otherwise, the Germans would not have discovered them by such a coincidence. Of course, it may also be a coincidence. If it is a coincidence, that would be the best. That way, they might still be able to escape. If it is not a coincidence, then they are in danger this time. Captain John, who didn't sleep all night, was very tired, but he forced himself to pull himself together. The next time is the most dangerous time, and there is no room for negligence. If they are not careful, they may die here. In less than half an hour, the watchman of the destroyer Lancaster issued an alarm. Captain John's complexion suddenly turned as dark as the bottom of a pot. "Captain, we found German destroyers. There are 6 of them in our northwest, southwest and west," an officer reported. "Arsehole. This is a trap." Captain John couldn't help cursing. The German Navy actually assembled 6 destroyers here, and there was no doubt that they were here. If it is general training, there is no need to gather so many destroyers at all. Obviously, the Germans already knew their mission and were here to wait for them. It's just that the current Captain John has no mind to deal with this. He has to find a way to lead the battleship to escape. Although the performance of the destroyer Lancaster is good, it is not inferior to the destroyers of the German Navy in one-on-one terms. However, in the case of a pair of 6, the destroyer Lancaster has no chance of winning at all. The 6 destroyers of the German Navy will easily send them to the bottom of the sea. Turn. Turn now. We can't go any further. Captain John gave the order. If you continue to move forward, you will only fall into the siege of the destroyers of the German Navy, and you will only end up being sunk. If they turn back, it will certainly make the mission fail this time, but at least they can be preserved. The most important thing is to be able to keep that gold. Yes, Captain. The navigator immediately went to control the rudder himself. The destroyer Lancaster drew an arc on the sea, quickly completed the turn, and wanted to escape back to the UK. But then, Captain John and other British naval officers and men despaired. Because, in front of them, a huge warship appeared. That battleship was the battlecruiser Blucher. The 3 triple-mounted 50 caliber 305mm main guns of the battlecruiser Blucher have already raised their barrels high. Fire. Fleet Commander Rear Admiral Lubeck issued an order. Boom. 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 The 3 triple-mounted 50 caliber 305mm main guns began to roar, and the shells roared and smashed into the destroyer Lancaster. Got the German battlecruiser. Captain John looked desperate. What should we do? Captain, the Germans have even appeared on the battlecruisers. Can we still escape? The other officers also looked terrified. They are just a small destroyer, and the battlecruisers of the German Navy can sink them with only one shot. Boom. 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 The shell fell beside the destroyer Lancaster, and after the explosion, a high column of water was splashed. Turn southwest, speed up and rush over. Captain John ordered. The destroyer Lancaster continued to turn, trying to evacuate from the southwest. However, They soon discovered that a huge battleship also appeared there. That was the light cruiser Magdeburg of the German Navy, with a displacement of more than 4,500 tons, equipped with 4 triple-mounted 105mm main guns, and a maximum speed of 27.6 knots. Boom. 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 When the light cruiser Magdeburg also started firing, a dense rain of bullets suddenly fell around the destroyer Lancaster, making the destroyer Lancaster dangerous. Damn, it's another German light cruiser. What should we do? This time, even Captain John didn't know what to do. It can be said that they have completely fallen into the siege of the German Navy. In all directions were warships of the German Navy. There are not only powerful battle cruisers and light cruisers, but also fast destroyers. This makes the light cruiser Lancaster difficult to fly, even if it is wrong. Boom. 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 The battleships surrounded by the German army fired continuously, and the shells exploded around the destroyer Lancaster, making the small destroyer like a small boat in a storm, which may capsize at any time. Captain, the Germans have sent a clear telegram. A signal soldier reported. What do the Germans want? Captain John asked. Captain, the Germans asked us to keep the gold, or we will be sunk. They emphasized that, if we don't repeatedly cooperate, they will kill us all. The signal soldier swallowed a mouthful of swearing, and then said, Gold? We have gold on our warships? My god. It turns out that the goods we loaded last night were all gold. No wonder the Germans are chasing us. What should we do now? If the gold is not given to the Germans, they will kill us. Damn Germans. Are they trying to violate international conventions? HMPH. Now Germany is the most powerful country in the world. Even if they kill us all, no one can do anything to them. The officers and soldiers of the British Navy on the destroyer Lancaster chattered one after another. Captain John's brows were already tightly knit together. The Germans really came for the gold. He received the task of safely transporting the gold to Canada. Failing that, the gold would have to be sunk to the bottom of the sea before it fell into German hands. But now, those despicable Germans are threatening them with their lives. This put Captain John in a dilemma. He had no doubt that the Germans would kill them all if they didn't do what the Germans asked them to do. That's right, our warships are transporting gold, a full 100 tons of gold. The gold is shipped to Canada. If we can't hold the mainland, we will go to Canada to continue fighting the Germans. Therefore, we need to send the gold to Canada in advance. The wealth of the country must be removed from the hands of the Germans. Captain John told the whole story. Chapter 810. Life is the most important. Although this war is still going on. However, the British have already attacked our homeland. The army has just been defeated by the Germans in the southeast and has lost millions of troops. Therefore, it seems that the army that wants to be defeated now, it is very difficult for the Germans to keep their homeland. In order to ensure that the empire can rise one day, we need to transport the gold to Canada as the capital for the empire's comeback. Unfortunately, we don't know which link will appear. There is a problem, but the news still leaked. Captain John said with a bitter face. Captain, what should we do now? If the Germans don't agree to their request, they will really kill us. A young sailor couldn't help asking. Obviously, everyone doesn't want to die. Captain, now we are surrounded by German warships. They cannot escape. There are only 2 roads ahead of us. One is to sink the war and sink into the sea with the gold. The other is to follow the Germans' request and give them the gold in exchange for our lives, said the navigator. Captain John nodded. Indeed, they only had these 2 options left. However, how to choose this made Captain John very embarrassed. If it was him, he would rather die in battle. In this case, the glory of the Royal Navy can also be maintained. However, Captain John could clearly see their desire to survive from the eyes of those sailors. For the benefit of the British Empire and the glory of the Royal Navy, we should fight to the end and absolutely cannot surrender to the Germans. Captain John said. Captain, the Germans will kill us all in that case. They are all devils, and they will do what they say. A sailor was almost crying. How about we open the sea valve and let the battleship sink? In this way, the gold will not fall into the hands of the Germans. An officer suggested. No, the Germans made it very clear. If we don't give them the gold, they will really kill us. A tall sailor shook his head and refused. Captain John's face couldn't help but look ugly, and he understood what they meant from the conversations of these people. Obviously, everyone wants to survive. If he stubbornly ordered the sinking of the battleship, maybe they would tie him up immediately, or even kill him. The interests of the empire and the glory of the Royal Navy appear so fragile and insignificant when their lives are threatened. Captain, we still have family members, and we don't want to die like this. Let's surrender to the Germans. A sailor prayed. Others also looked at Captain John with pleading eyes. Okay, just do as you said. Captain John sighed helplessly. Yes, Captain. The faces of the other sailors had a look of survivors. The destroyer Lancaster immediately called back the German fleet and then began to reduce its speed in accordance with the requirements of the German fleet until it came to a complete stop. The soldiers of the German Marine Corps, who had been prepared for a long time, boarded the destroyer Lancaster in a small boat. The British sailors cooperated very well, and the German Marine Corps easily controlled the warship. Subsequently, a large amount of gold began to be transferred to the battlecruiser Blucher. When the boxes were opened one by one, and the inside was filled with glittering gold, everyone who saw this scene even became a little short of breath. Very well, the British are still very cooperative. Send the destroyer back to Germany. Then, the battlecruiser Blucher returns to the country, and the other warships continue their missions. Major General Lubeck ordered 100 tons of gold, worth more than 300 million marks. This is not a small fortune for Germany. If it is used to build an aircraft carrier, it is enough to build several. The news that the destroyer Lancaster was captured by the German Navy shocked the British government. That's 100 tons of gold. It was taken away by the Germans. Churchill also had a very headache. Although he had asked the Gold Transit Committee to keep it strictly confidential, the result was still the same in the end. However, although the destroyer Lancaster failed, Churchill still asked the Gold Transit Committee to continue to find ways to transport the wealth to Canada. If you stay in the UK, once the British Home Army is defeated, all the wealth will fall into the hands of the Germans. Instead of this, it is better to ship to Canada as much as possible. Even if there will be some failures, it will be able to transport some wealth away. After the fall of the British Empire, they can count on those wealth to make a comeback. Otherwise, relying on Canada's millions of people and taxation alone, it would be impossible to realize their plan. In addition to using destroyers to transport that wealth, the British Gold Transit Council also employed submarines. Compared with destroyers, submarines have better secrecy and are less likely to be discovered. However, after the German intelligence agencies learned about the transportation methods and routes of the British wealth, they still blocked the British several times. A submarine encountered a destroyer of the German Navy as soon as it entered the Atlantic Ocean. As a last resort, the British submarine could only dive gently to avoid it. However, the destroyers of the German Navy continued to drop depth charges, forcing the British submarine to surface. In the end, the British submarine had to surface because it was damaged. The hundreds of tons of gold it transported also fell into the hands of the Germans. If the submarine does not float, it will only sink to the bottom of the sea. Those submariners who don't want to die will naturally take saving their own lives as their top priority. Of course, there are also people who regard death as home. In the German Navy's battle to intercept British destroyers and submarines, people who fought to the death often encountered people who would never surrender to the German Navy until they were sunk. The action of the British Gold Transit Commission lasted for a full month. During the period, they used 20 destroyers and 30 submarines to transport the wealth. Part of the wealth was intercepted by the German Navy, and the other part was sunk, and sank to the bottom of the icy Atlantic Ocean, where it became a buried treasure. The rest were safely transported to Canada. The total value of that batch of wealth is as high as hundreds of billions of marks. This is also the reason why the British government was able to persist in Canada after the fall of the mainland, and it also armed a powerful army, constantly causing trouble for Germany. It can be said that these wealth played a vital role. Chapter 811. Last Battle. Gentlemen, the 4 German legions have already set off and are approaching London. With their marching speed, the offensive and defensive Battle of London will officially start in 2 days at most. Judging from the current situation, Germany, the troops who landed in the British mainland consisted of 4 legions, plus 5 marine divisions, with a total strength of about 1.2 million. The Imperial Army has already assembled 7 legions, 1.4 million in London. In addition, we are on the defensive side, and can use fortifications to attack the Germans. Therefore, we still have a great advantage. If the timing is good, it is not impossible to defeat the Germans in London. Britain War Secretary Richard Haldane preached at the Council of War. As the German army began to approach London, the tension in London also increased. Originally, the British Continental Army had only 6 armies with 1.2 million troops stationed in London. However, the 200,000 people withdrawn from the Southeast Theatre were reorganized into the First Army and joined London's defense sequence, which further strengthened London's defense forces. But even so, people in London are still in panic. If King George V and Prime Minister Churchill hadn't made public appearances many times, maybe many people would have started to flee. The performance of the German army in the Southeast Theatre really scared the officers and soldiers of the British Continental Army. Although, in the past few months, the British Army has almost built London into a fortress. However, many people still do not have the confidence to resist the German attack. I don't deny that the German army's combat effectiveness is very strong, and it deserves the title of the world's #1 army. However, this is already London, the capital of the British Empire. If London falls, the British Empire will be completely over. So, I hope everyone can do their best for the British Empire in this battle. Richard Haldane continued. The generals of the British Army present here are naturally willing to work hard. However, the prerequisite is to be able to beat the German army. If you can beat it at all, and it's like sending yourself to death, I'm afraid not many people are willing. After all, everyone is not a fool who would want to do the death thing. Your Excellency, the Minister of War, when the Germans attack London, they will definitely send out a large number of planes to bomb. And the Royal Air Force is completely lost, which will make us pay a high price in the process of defending against the German attack. Yes, if we don't solve this problem, I'm afraid it will be very difficult for us to resist the German attack, said a general. The overwhelming bombing by the German army shocked many British generals. Such tactics gave them a great headache. When defending against the frontal enemy, you also have to guard against the enemy's attack from above. This naturally made the troops tired of coping when they were fighting. The remaining fighter planes of the Royal Air Force are running out. In order to preserve their strength, they have all been transferred to the north. However, after the Battle of London breaks out, I will ask the Royal Air Force to fight. No matter what, they can somewhat contain the Germans' plane, said Richard Haldane. Your Excellency, Minister of War, we have more anti-tank weapons. The Germans have too many tanks and are too powerful. The light weapons in the hands of soldiers are simply unable to compete. If there are not enough anti-tank weapons in the battle to defend London, if not, we may still be defeated by German tanks. With regard to anti-tank weapons, I have asked the arsenal to work overtime for production. I promise that I will provide as many anti-tank weapons as possible to the ministries. However, everyone should also be aware that due to the lack of raw materials, our arsenal the production capacity is seriously insufficient. Richard Haldane said. After the United Kingdom was blocked by Germany, it fell into a serious shortage of resources. The various resources produced in the United Kingdom cannot even support the British. In the past few hundred years, the British transported various materials to the mainland through overseas colonies, which enabled the rapid development of the United Kingdom. Once the overseas trade lines were cut off, Britain was almost destroyed. That's why Britain desperately developed its navy and defended their maritime interests with a powerful navy. But it is a pity that this time the Royal Navy failed to defeat the powerful challenger, but was almost completely wiped out. This directly shook the foundation of the British Empire. The reason why the British Empire has fallen to this point is inseparable from the failure of the Royal Navy. Churchill also attended this military meeting, but he was a little dissatisfied with the attitude of these generals. He could see that everyone was a little negative. This may be because of the disastrous defeat of the British Army in the Southeast Theatre. Therefore, these generals were frightened by the strength of the Germans. Everyone. The British Empire is now at the last moment of life and death. If we cannot resist the German attack, then the British Empire will be completely over. Perhaps, through other means, everyone has learned that the government plans to fall in the mainland. Afterwards, I moved to Canada to continue to fight against the Germans. However, I would like to advise everyone that it is a choice of last resort. If possible, we naturally want to keep our homeland. Only with the homeland can the British Empire have hope. If you lose your home country, what if you escape to Canada? The possibility of counter-attacking Germany and regaining the homeland is very small, Churchill said with a serious face. Indeed, as Churchill said, some generals of the British Continental Army do have such thoughts. Anyway, if they can't keep their homeland, they can still go to Canada and continue to occupy high positions. Even if ordinary soldiers cannot take them away, generals like them must be able to escape from Britain. Therefore, they did not take the German attack seriously. But this is obviously very unfavorable for the upcoming London War. Also, don't think it's safe to retreat to Canada. Don't forget, the Germans have the most powerful navy in the world. If they want, they can cross the Atlantic Ocean to attack Canada at any time. And with our strength in Canada, it is almost impossible to resist the Germans. Therefore, in the Battle of London, we must injure the Germans as much as possible and make them pay a heavy price. Only in this way can Canada be safe. Churchill continued. The generals of the British Army all had serious expressions, and they could understand what Churchill meant. Chapter 812. German Tactics. After rest and reorganization, the combat effectiveness of the four German armies returned to its peak state. Although the shortage of soldiers in some units has not been filled, the fatigue of the soldiers has been alleviated, and at the same time they have been replenished with a large amount of weapons and ammunition, and their combat effectiveness has recovered. The German army's losses in the Battle of Canterbury were not large, so the decline in combat effectiveness due to the shortage of troops was not serious. Regardless of moral or combat effectiveness, they are completely capable of crushing the British troops stationed in London. The 5 small towns of Dotford, Sidcup, Bromley, Croydon and Epsom in South London are almost connected in a straight line. This caused the British Army defending London to deploy heavy troops in these small cities. And with the help of these small cities, a solid line of defense was built. I want to rely on this line of defense again to stop the German attack on London. In other words, they want to use this line of defense to further consume the vital strength of the German army. The British army knew that with their current strength, it would be very difficult to defeat the German army. Their only chance of winning is to consume as much of the German army's vitality as possible in urban street battles. Only in this way can the German army pay a heavy price in the battle and win. Knowing that the combat power of the British army was seriously inferior to that of the German army, the British army could only rely on the power of fortifications. On the southern defense line, the British army originally deployed 2 armies, namely the 12th Army and the 13th Army. Later, the reorganized 1st Army was added. General Haig, who had retreated from the front line, was appointed commander of the southern defense line, with full command of the 3 armies here. General Haig, I hope you can lead the troops to hold out on the southern defense line for more than a month. In this case, we can not only use this time to further consolidate the defense line in London, but also allow the Germans to pay a greater price there. The price will lay the foundation for the victory of the Battle of London, said Richard Haldane. Although Admiral Haig has already been regarded as the defeated general of the German army, he has been defeated by the Germans many times. However, this does not prevent his ability from being recognized. In Richard Haldane's view, Admiral Haig has the ability, but he is just a little bit unlucky. Another reason is that the German army is too strong. With such a huge disparity in strength between the two sides, no matter how strong Admiral Haig's personal ability is, it is impossible to help Britain win. Your Excellency, this is probably very difficult. The combat effectiveness of the 12th and 13th armies is inherently limited. Even the 1st Army is nothing more than a rout in the southeast theater. Their will to fight has long been destroyed by the Germans. Yes, if it goes to the battlefield, I'm afraid it won't have much effect. At that time, as long as the German army launches an attack, many people will definitely surrender directly to the German army. Admiral Haig looked worried. Obviously, he didn't think that with these 3 armies, he would be able to hold on to the southern defense line for a month. General Haig, let's do this. I don't set a time limit. Once you think you can't hold on, you can choose to retreat. However, I hope to hold on for as long as possible and cause as many casualties as possible to the German army. After all, the current situation is very unfavorable to us. Even if we want to abandon the mainland and retreat to Canada, we must further weaken the strength of the Germans. Otherwise, the Germans may attack us across the Atlantic at any time. Wiesenschad Haldane said. General Haig nodded. Your Excellency, I will do my best. The entire southern line of defense is only more than 40 kilometers away. The British Army has deployed 600,000 troops on this line of defense, which is considered very strong. Admiral Haig deployed the 1st Army as a reserve force to the north of the line of defense. The 12th and 13th Armies were stationed on the defense line. The 1st Army attacked Dartford, broke through the British defenses, and entered London from here. The 2nd Army attacked Bromley, broke through and entered London from here. The 3rd Army attacked Croydon. The 8th Army attacked Epsom, and after conquering it, quickly advanced to the northeast, cooperated with other troops, and wiped out the troops deployed by the British on this line of defense. Marshal von Falkenhayn pointed to several places on the map, said the city. Yes, Your Excellency the Marshal. Several Legion commanders replied. At this juncture, the British did not shrink their troops, but instead allocated such a large force. It is simply courting death. Admiral Crook said, London is an international metropolis, deploying millions of troops. There is no problem at all. In that case, if the German army wanted to conquer London, it would have to attack little by little, competing with the British for every street and every house in downtown London. In that case, not only will it take time and effort, but the casualties of the troops will not be too small. After all, in street fighting, one needs to face sudden dangers at any time, and even experienced veterans are very likely to lose their lives. However, now the British Army has took the initiative to deploy as many as 600,000 troops outside London. Isn't this giving the German army a chance to destroy them? Once the German army eliminated the 600,000 British troops, then, there are not many British troops left in London. At that time, the difficulty for the German army to take London can be greatly reduced. Who knows, maybe the British haven't given up their delusion to keep London. They thought they could keep us out of London, so that their capital would not be turned into ruins. Admiral Below sneered. Fighting in the British mainland, the German army can be said to have let go. In order to reduce the casualties of the troops, heavy artillery was used extensively. Anyway, if the city is broken, it belongs to the British, and it has nothing to do with Germany. But the British don't seem to want to leave their city in ruins, and this undoubtedly caused problems in their command, thus creating more opportunities for the German army. No matter what the British think, we just need to eliminate them and win this war. Admiral Howson was very straightforward. Everyone, after dealing with the troops deployed by the British outside the city, the 1st Army and the 2nd Army attacked London from the south. The 3rd Army detoured to attack from the west of London, and the 8th Army needed to cross the Thames River and fight to go to the north of London. I hope that the last remaining force of the British Army can be wiped out in London. Marshal von Falkenhayn continued. Yes, Your Excellency the Marshal. All the generals replied. Chapter 813. The gap is too big. Boom. 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 Less than 5 kilometers away from Epsom is the artillery position of the German 8th Army. The artillery belonging to 10 infantry divisions is firing fiercely at Epsom and its surroundings. Since Emperor Qin Tian became the commander of the 8th Army, he has focused on strengthening the firepower of the infantry. Cannons are even more important. After the 8th Army won a big victory on the Eastern Front, the German army also strengthened the firepower of various troops during the winter-long rest. This makes the current German army have the most powerful artillery fire in the world. The 8th Army has a total of 180 150mm heavy howitzers, 360 105mm light howitzers and 540 75mm field guns. Not counting light artillery such as mortars, there are a total of 1080 artillery pieces. The number of such artillery is already very terrifying. In another time and space, only the Americans during World War II can compare with it. The artillerymen carried the shells shirtless, stuffed the shells into the barrel, and fired them out. They don't care about whether the shells fired hit the target at all. The firepower preparation of the German army before the attack often took the form of covering shooting, that is, firing shells to a certain area. Anyway, under the intensive artillery fire, there are very few who can escape. Even with the blessing of God, I escaped by luck. But the number is also very limited, and they don't pose much of a threat anymore. Boom. 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 The artillery shell exploded on the British Army's position. Earth and rocks flew across, and there was a burst of flying sand and rocks. Soon, the position of the British Army became like the surface of the moon. There are craters left by shell explosions everywhere. The fortifications built by the British Army are constantly being destroyed under the heavy shelling of the German Army. The city of Epsom was also the target of German shelling. After all, the British built a lot of fortifications in the city, trying to use street fighting to make the Germans pay a heavy price. It is better to use as many shells as possible to cause losses to the British than to use infantry to destroy them. In order to hit the British Army as much as possible, and also hit their morale, the German Army took a very long time to prepare for firepower. Throughout the day of September 14th, firepower preparations were carried out. The artillerymen need to shoot at least half of the shells stored by the German Army during this period. You know, that's millions of shells. It may be hard to imagine what is left on the British southern defense line after the German shelling is over. The powerful artillery fire of the German Army was enough to plow the British Army's position several times like using a plow. Oh my god. The German shelling has been going on for a whole morning. Don't they have free shells? A British soldier complained. At this moment, he is holding his head, shrinking in the anti-blasting hole. The dust constantly falling from the top of his head made him look like a mud monkey. The Germans have long been known for their powerful artillery fire. On the battlefield, they will never let the infantry go all out if they can kill the enemy with artillery shells. A veteran said, "No wonder the Germans are so powerful. If we also have such a powerful artillery, maybe we won't be beaten so badly by the Germans." A young British soldier looked forward to it. HMPH. The reason why the Germans dare to do this is because they have a strong industrial and logistical system. In other countries, how could there be so many shells? Even if there were so many shells, it would be difficult to transport them to the front line, said an officer. Although the industry of the British Empire is inferior to that of Germany, it is not impossible to do all of this, especially when fighting at home. But unfortunately, the Empire's home resources are insufficient. After the defeat of the Navy, the overseas trade line has been cut off. Now there are empty arsenals, but no raw materials to produce those ammunition and weapons, so naturally they are far behind the Germans. The officer continued. There was a sudden silence in the bomb defense cave. Everyone knew very well that the current British Empire was just struggling to prepare. It's all the Navy. The Navy accounts for a large part of the military expenditure every year, but they still lost to the Germans in the end. It made the Empire fall to where it is today. Someone complained. The Navy is not easy. They have tried their best. It is said that countless people died in the Navy. Everything is because the Germans are too powerful. Someone said, "Okay, shut up. If you don't have time to talk about this, why not pray to God and pray that the German shells won't blow down our bomb defense holes?" The officer scolded. Immediately, the other soldiers had no choice but to say nothing more. Boom. Boom. Two loud bangs sounded above the heads of these British soldiers, and cracks appeared on the ceiling of the top of the anti-bunker hole between them, and dust mixed with stones fell from above. Damn it, we were hit by heavy German artillery, and the anti-battery hole is about to collapse. Run away. The British soldiers hiding in the anti-gun cave ran desperately towards the entrance of the cave, trying to escape from here. However, the entrance of the cave was so small that it was so crowded that, except for a few people who stayed at the entrance and managed to escape, the rest of the people were buried alive in it. The powerful artillery fire of the German army has begun to exert great power. Not only the fortifications of the British army were destroyed, but also the anti-gun holes of the British army were also blown up, which caused the losses of the British army on the front line to continue to rise. The artillerymen of the German army faithfully fulfilled their responsibility, that is, to clear the way for the infantry to attack as much as possible. Compared with the infantry who had to attack against the enemy's bullets, the artillery was undoubtedly happy. At least, their safety is guaranteed under normal circumstances. Unless it is when a fierce artillery battle breaks out between the two sides, the safety of the infantry will be threatened. However, such cases are generally rare. Especially after the German army has a strong army air force, it is even more difficult for the enemy to threaten the German artillery. In order to minimize the loss of one's own troops during the attack, the German army will carry out fire strikes regardless of the cost before the attack. Even if this will increase the cost of the war, the German army will not hesitate. After all, the cannonballs can be manufactured when they run out. But if the soldiers are killed, there is nothing left. The population of Germany is not large, which makes the lives of these German soldiers even more precious. In contrast, the British artillery has remained silent. It's not that they would rather be like this, but that their strength is inferior to others. At the same time, they did not want to be bombed by German planes. Chapter 814. Rolling. Got. Is this still our position? A British officer looked at the devastated position with a look of disbelief. After the sun went down, the heavy German shelling finally stopped. This also gave the British army a chance to breathe. Many British officers and soldiers climbed out of the bomb defense holes that had not been bombed. But the scene outside was completely different from before they got into the blast hole. The urban area has completely become a ruin, and even their positions seem to have been plowed several times by someone. Most of the trenches they worked so hard to dig were blown up, the barbed wire was blown to pieces, and there was no firepower left. What's more terrible is that some artillery holes were blown down, and the officers and soldiers inside were buried alive, which caused the loss of the British army to rise sharply. Before the German offensive started, they lost like this. How should this battle be fought? Damn the Germans, how many shells did they drop on our positions? The fortifications are almost destroyed. When the Germans launch an attack, what should we do? The British officers and soldiers on the ground were filled with a sense of panic and despair. Everyone is paying attention. The general ordered to rest the fortifications immediately. The commander of the British army issued an order. In order to reduce casualties as much as possible in the following battles, it is obviously impossible without fortifications. Therefore, it is necessary to rebuild the fortifications. Although the time is a little too late, it is still good to take a break. The officers and soldiers of the British army, who had been frightened for a day, had to pick up their tools and start to rest their fortifications. Everyone is very tired, but there is no way but to obey orders. Early the next morning, the German shelling began again. This time the shelling density was even higher, and the fortifications that the British army had rested overnight were almost destroyed by the heavy shelling of the German army again. The German firepower preparation this time did not last long, only an hour. On the forward position, the German soldiers who had had a full breakfast and were full of fighting spirit were ready to attack. At 8 o'clock in the morning, with the order of the commander, the German soldiers of the two infantry divisions began to attack. Quick, the Germans are coming. Countless British soldiers followed the traffic trench and entered the position to block the German army. Although their positions have been destroyed to a disastrous state, they still have some defensive capabilities. In the sky, dozens of German aircraft appeared, including fighter jets and bombers. These planes bombarded and strafed the positions of the British army, causing heavy losses to the British troops, who had just entered the position. The rest were huddled in the trenches, too afraid to raise their heads, let alone shoot to stop the German infantry. Crunch. The tanks' tracks were crushed on the ground, making a tooth-piercing sound. In order to quickly break through the British defense line, the German army invested in armored forces in the first round of offensive. Anti-tank gun. Pull up quickly. German tanks are coming. A British officer shouted in horror. A 2-pound anti-tank gun pulled up to the position. However, it was blown up by German planes after only one shot. Oh my god. How could we resist so many tanks? A British soldier watched the torrent of steel rushing towards their position and was scared to pee. Da. British positions, machine guns fired. The attacking German soldiers were suppressed. However, a tank then destroyed the British machine gun with a tank gun, clearing the way for the attacking German army. Machine gun cover. A German company commander ordered loudly. Two general-purpose machine guns began to fire immediately, and the dense rain of bullets hit the British Army defending this section of the position, unable to raise their heads. Subsequently, more than a dozen grenades were thrown on the British position. Boom. 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 Intensive explosions sounded, and the British troops on the battlefield were crying for their fathers and mothers after being bombed, and suffered heavy losses. The German army, which was originally suppressed, took the opportunity to break into the British Army's position. Crack, crack, crack. Clear pistol sounds sounded, and the first wave of German soldiers who broke into the British position quickly killed the surrounding British soldiers with pistols, clearing out a position. Then, start from this position, and expand the position. More and more German soldiers poured into the British position from this gap. Hurry up, the defense line on the left has been breached, let the reserve team dispatch to regain the position. A British division commander ordered. More than 2,000 British soldiers bravely rushed to this position. However, what greeted them was bombing and strafing from the sky. When the bomb dropped by the bomber exploded in the queue of the British Army, a large number of British soldiers were bombed and torn to pieces. The dense bullets of aviation machine guns even smashed many British soldiers into sieves. When the British Army began to counterattack the German army that invaded their position, it had lost a small half of its troops. And then, their counterattack was hit head-on by the powerful firepower of the German army. The soldiers of the German army used machine guns, mortars, and grenades to let the British army experience what it means to have powerful defensive firepower. After the British army left a lot of corpses, they fled away. When the tracks of the German tanks crushed the British positions, the British positions completely collapsed. The British army, which suffered heavy losses, began to retreat without an order from its superiors. In order to speed up their escape, they even threw away their rifles, wishing their parents would give them 2 more legs. The German 8th Army broke through the British defense line in Epsom in just half a day. The British army suffered heavy losses and retreated to the urban area that was bombed into ruins. However, under the crushing power of the German army, can the British army withstand it? That is obviously impossible. That afternoon, the German 8th Army entered the urban area of Epsom to wipe out the British troops here. Not only the attack of the 8th Army went smoothly, but the attacks of the other 3 German armies also went smoothly. Although, the resistance of the British army is still firm, and the will to fight is still quite complete. However, the strength gap between the two sides was so great that the British army was completely crushed in front of the German army. Under such circumstances, it is simply impossible to expect them to hold their positions and resist the German attack. During the battle on September 14th, the 4 German armies all won victories on the southern defense line. The British 12th Army and 13th Army deployed on the southern defense line were directly crushed, and in the end they could only huddle in the urban area to survive. Chapter 815. Crash across the board. General, the 12th Army has lost more than 50,000 people in today's battle. There are still a large number of soldiers who have been frightened. They hide behind like quail, and dare not fight on the front line. This battle how to fight. General Robert, the commander of the British 12th Army, complained to General Haig. General, the 13th Army's losses are also very large. The German offensive is too fierce and powerful. We can't resist it at all. The commander of the 13th Army, General George, also looked very ugly. If before fighting the German army, they still thought that the German army was in vain, then now, they know the strength of the German army. What's more, their performance was even worse than the troops they laughed at. I know. But, we still need to persevere as much as possible. Admiral Haig said. The battle has only started for 1 day, and the 2 armies can't hold on anymore. The Secretary of War, Richard Haldane, wanted to keep them on the southern line for a month. How could that be possible? General, if possible, it is best to give us some reinforcement. Otherwise, I really can't hold on anymore. Admiral Robert said. General Haig did have reinforcement in his hands, a group army of more than 200,000 people. Moreover, this group army is still considered elite. However, this group army was reorganized by selecting soldiers from the broken troops in the Southeast Theater. After suffering a big defeat in the Southeast Theater, the fighting spirit of these soldiers has been seriously affected. It is undoubtedly very difficult for them to take up arms to fight against the Germans. Even Admiral Haig didn't know what kind of performance these guys would have on the battlefield. However, the current situation is already very tense. If reinforcements are not sent to the front line may really collapse. Well, tomorrow morning I will deploy troops from the 1st Army to reinforce you. I hope that everyone can try their best to hold on, Admiral Haig said. Admiral Robert and Admiral George nodded. They now think that even one day is a luxury. However, they knew the order from Richard Haldane, and if they retreated now, there was really no way to explain it. Therefore, they can only bite the bullet and grit their teeth to fight for a longer period of time. On the morning of September 15th, the German army, which had rested for the night, continued to attack. Although Admiral Haig mobilized a lot of troops from the 1st Army to reinforce the front line. However, the British army was still beaten and retreated steadily under the fierce German attack. Although the British army can rely on the buildings in the urban area to defend. However, under the previous shelling and bombing by the German army, the buildings in the urban area have been almost destroyed. There are ruins everywhere. The fortifications built by the British army in the urban area were also destroyed. It also caused heavy losses to the British troops stationed in the urban area. After the German army entered the urban area, the German artillery positions moved forward for a full 2 or 3 kilometers in order to provide more direct fire support to the attacking German army. Mortar, destroy that bunker of the British. On a narrow street, the German army was suppressed at the corner. At the corner at the end of the street is a British bunker. Inside the bunker, a heavy machine gun was firing. Several German soldiers were killed. Company commander, that bunker can hit the blind spot of our shelling, and the mortar can't reach it. Damn it. Contact the regiment headquarters, we need artillery reinforcement. The company commander ordered. The communications soldier immediately contacted the regiment headquarters. Sir, the regiment headquarters asked us to evacuate here, and they will carry out a round of fire coverage here in 5 minutes. The company commander nodded, and then led the troops to withdraw from the street. The British army on the defense line couldn't help cheering after seeing the German army retreating. Although the German army was strong, they were at least temporarily safe after defeating the German attack. 5 minutes later, there was a sharp whistling sound in the sky. This made the faces of the British officers and soldiers whose smiles had not faded change drastically. Of course they knew what these sharp whistling sounds meant. My god. Shelling. German shelling. Countless panicked British soldiers ran out from the line of defense, trying to escape into the bomb defense hole. However, it was too late by this time. The shells have fallen. Boom. 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 Intensive explosions sounded, and the British soldiers who had just escaped from the position were instantly torn to pieces in the explosion. The human body is very fragile at this time. Life at this moment is undoubtedly extremely fragile. Even the bunker with the British army was blown to pieces during the German shelling. When the German shelling stopped, a group of German soldiers returned to the street, but they soon discovered that there were no enemies left. In other words, there are no living enemies anymore. The British troops on the previous garrison positions were all killed, and there were stumps and broken arms everywhere. God, are we here to fight or to collect the bodies of the British? This battle is too simple. A German soldier complained. In his opinion, this battle is too easy. It is no longer a war. It is clearly just a game. Relying on their powerful firepower, the German army bullied the weak British. Idiot. Of course the battle is fought like this. Don't you still want to charge with the powerful firepower of the British? That's a fool's job, and it will kill you. An old soldier cursed. These recruits, thinking about strange things in their minds all day long, have no idea how cruel the battlefield is. Veterans who have experienced brutal battlefields believe that this tactic is the best now, because this can minimize their own casualties. And no matter at what time, the greatest wish of those ordinary soldiers is to be able to survive the war. The 4 Corps of the German army attacked the British Army's southern defense line very violently. Although the resistance of the British army was also very resolute, they were suppressed by the powerful firepower of the German army, and their losses were so great that many British troops collapsed directly under the strong pressure of the German army. Originally, the British Minister of War Richard Haldane hoped that the Cabinet General would be able to hold out on the southern defense line for a month. But in fact, the German 8th Army captured Epsom in just 3 days. Afterwards, the 8th Army began to advance to the northeast, threatening to kill all the British troops on the southern defense line. This frightened the British Army and directly led to the collapse of the British Army across the board. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 816. Fight for total annihilation. General, the 13th Army can't hold on anymore. The troops on the front line have been disintegrated. The Germans are advancing towards us. According to the advancing speed of the Germans, they will reach us in a short time. An officer said. Report to Admiral Haig. Damn it, has the 13th Army collapsed? What about Admiral George? What the asterisk is he doing? Admiral Haig cursed. General George has fled to London, said the officer. Bastard. Order the troops. Prepare to retreat. Admiral Haig had no choice but to issue such an order. Although, his original intention was to be able to hold out on the southern defense line for a while longer. However, when the 13th Army has collapsed, and the 12th Army doesn't seem to be able to last long, if you continue to hold on, it will only lead to a dead end. Under such circumstances, Admiral Haig had no choice but to order a retreat. If you retreat, you can still preserve some strength and join the defense in the London area. If all these troops are lost here, it will undoubtedly further weaken London's defense. That would be wasted in vain. It's a pity that Admiral Haig's plan is good, but implementing it is not so easy. At this moment, the British Army suffered heavy losses under the fierce German attack, and their morale fell to the bottom. Under such circumstances, how could they have the guts to continue fighting? After Admiral Haig gave the order to retreat, a large number of British troops fled immediately, and there were no troops to delay the enemy and cover the retreat of the main force. Of course, the German army would not let go of this opportunity, and immediately launched a more violent attack. Thus, the retreat of the British army turned into a complete rout. A large number of British soldiers fled to London in embarrassment, while the German army chased after them. A human's legs cannot run on the tracks of a tank, and the German armored forces fully utilized their speed advantage in such battles. When the fleeing British army was caught up by the German army, in order to save their lives, the British soldiers immediately raised their hands and chose to surrender. These British officers and soldiers have been frightened by the Germans on the battlefield. Being able to save a small life has become their greatest wish. How can they have the courage to continue fighting? Even when they were strafed and bombed by fighter planes of the German Army Air Corps, many British soldiers knelt down and surrendered, not daring to run away anymore. They knelt on the side of the road obediently, waiting for the German infantry to come and capture them. It can be said that in this battle, the fighting spirit of the British Army has been completely shattered. Even if these officers and soldiers were not captured by the German army and fled back to London, it would not be of much use. Because they have been frightened, and they no longer have the courage to take up arms and continue to fight against the German army. The pursuit of the German army did not stop until the 3 suburbs of London. Of the 3 suburbs of London British armies stationed on the southern defense line, more than 600,000 people, only more than 100,000 people fled back to London. The remaining more than 500,000 people, except those who died in battle, surrendered to the German army. This made the temporary prisoner of war camps set up by the German army overcrowded for a while. Of course, those seriously injured cannot receive medical treatment. It's not because the German army is desperate to save them, but because there is a lack of medicines on the front line. Those medicines must be given priority to rescue German soldiers, and the British can only wait. As for those British who were slightly injured, they could be treated. Of course, medical conditions will not be better. Whether you can live or not depends on whether God blesses you. The German attack on the entire southern defense line lasted only 5 days. The gap between this and the British Army Secretary Richard Haldane's request is too great. Especially the soldiers who only fled back with 100,000 discarded armor in the end, made he was very angry. However, Richard Haldane knew that there was no way. The German army was too strong, and the British army was too weak. After Marshal von Falkenhayn learned that the Battle of the Southern Defense Line was easily won by the Germans again, and won a big victory, his old face was full of smiles. The British are becoming more and more useless. They are simply vulnerable. If this continues, we should be able to take London soon and end this **** war. Your Majesty wants us to take it before Christmas, Britain, but now it seems that we can complete the task at super speed. Marshal von Falkenhayn said. Originally, the Empire has always been more worried about landing in the British mainland to fight. The British are used to being the hegemon of the world, and they will certainly not surrender to the German Empire easily. So, almost everyone thinks it will be a tough fight. The two sides will break out a fierce battle in Britain. If Germany wants to defeat Britain, it will definitely have a protracted war. Maybe the whole of Britain will be turned into a piece of scorched earth, and the losses of the German army will not be small. But now it seems that the smoothness of the battle has completely exceeded everyone's expectations. Although the British are strong, they are actually vulnerable. Their huge force easily suffered heavy losses under the attack of the German army. Now, there is not even much will to resist. Your Excellency, Marshal, perhaps we can take London by the end of this month. By then, the Battle of Britain will almost come to an end. Lieutenant General Ludendorff said. Will London be captured within this month? There are still more than 10 days left. Although the time is a little tight, it is indeed entirely possible. Marshal von Falkenhayn nodded. However, when attacking London, we still have to try our best to reduce the casualties of the troops. The war is about to end, and I hope that more people can survive instead of losing their lives at the last moment. Von Fair Marshal Kenhayn said. Yes, Your Excellency the Marshal. Lieutenant General Ludendorff also knew this. General Ludendorff, the 8th Army will set off tomorrow. Whether we can wipe out the British defenders in London this time depends on you. Marshal von Falkenhayn said. If you want to complete their work in one battle, the German army must eliminate all the last main force of the British army in London. The task of the 8th Army was to cross the Thames and go around to North London. The defense zone of the 3rd Army is west of London. The main forces attacking downtown London will be the 1st and 2nd Army Corps. The 3rd Army and the 8th Army only played an assisting role. If the plan is successful, the troops assembled by the British Army in London will be dead. Chapter 817. Escape from London. Damn it, how did this battle end like this? Richard Haldane's face was full of frustration and unwillingness. In just 5 days, the British Army suffered a disastrous defeat on the Southern Defense Line. With more than 600,000 people, only more than 100,000 people fled back. Such a loss is too great. The defensive force in London has dropped sharply to more than 900,000, not even 1 million. In the two wars, the German army was not much damaged, and their strength was at least more than 1 million. This also means that in the Battle of London, the British army lost even its superiority in strength. Although, in other parts of the UK, the British army still has more than 1 million troops. But the troops in Ireland and Scotland obviously cannot be mobilized. The Irish had already fought a war deployed against British rule under the outbreak of the Germans. Even many Irish soldiers rebelled directly by the British army in Ireland were exhausted, and there was no way to suppress them. The same is true for the Scottish army. There is already a gap between the Scots and the English. They preferred to stay in England when the British Empire was overwhelming. However, the UK is obviously out of luck now. If you continue to stay in the UK, not only will you not get the slightest advantage, but you may be unlucky. Under such circumstances, the rule of the British government is already in danger. As for troops deployed in northern England and Wales, vigilance is also required. If it is transferred, no one can guarantee whether the Germans will send troops to land in these areas. At that time, it will pose a greater threat to the United Kingdom. Churchill was also silent. The development of the battle situation was indeed far beyond their expectations. It can be said that the performance of the British army in this war was really unbearable. Under the attack of the Germans, it collapsed easily, without the ability to resist at all. Churchill now only thinks how ridiculous it was that he wanted to rely on the army to defeat the Germans at home. His Excellency, Minister of War, it seems that London is already hard to defend, right? Churchill asked. Yes, Your Excellency, the Prime Minister. The Germans are too powerful. They are so powerful that they are completely beyond our expectations. And our army is too weak. Even if we build a large number of fortifications in London, I'm afraid they cannot withstand German human attack," said Richard Haldane. Although, this fact made it very difficult for him to accept. However, he had to accept this reality. The elite troops of the British Army have almost lost almost all of them on the battlefield. Although the 4th Army and 5th Army in the City of London can barely be regarded as elite troops. But compared to the German army, these two armies are no different from garbage. It is simply unrealistic to pin your hopes on them. "How long can we last in London?" Churchill asked. "Your Excellency, half a month at most. It may not even last for half a month. Our troops no longer have the courage to continue fighting." Richard Haldane was completely disappointed with the army. Churchill felt a pang of sorrow in his heart. The current battle situation has indeed reached its final juncture, Your Excellency. I fully understand. Compared with the German army, there is a big gap between our army and the German army. It is not only the gap in weapons and equipment, but also the gap in quality, will and tactics. The Germans have already we are more than an era ahead of us. Under such circumstances, it is almost impossible for us to resist the German attack. Therefore, after arriving in Canada, we must focus on strengthening training in these areas. Otherwise, it will still be difficult for us to defeat the Germans on the future battlefield," Richard Haldane said. Churchill nodded. He also knew that without a strong army, it would be foolish to want to defeat the Germans. "Your Excellency, London cannot be defended. According to the information we have received, an elite German army is rapidly advancing towards the Thames. I suspect that they want to encircle London from the north. If they succeed, the entire London will fall into their siege. At that time, it will be impossible to evacuate," Richard Haldane said. Churchill couldn't help frowning. The Germans still have such a big appetite. If all the troops in London are wiped out by them, then the whole of Britain will be finished. "Yes, Your Excellency. Therefore, Your Excellency and Your Majesty, it is best to leave London immediately and go to Canada. Otherwise, there will be variables," Richard Haldane suggested. "Let Your Majesty go to Canada. I'll forget it. I'd rather stay in London, and when London falls, I'll fight the Germans myself." Churchill shook his head. "Your Excellency Prime Minister, you can't die here. Canada still needs you to lead. Even if we lose at home, we still have a chance to rise. As long as we can defeat the Germans in future wars, the British Empire, there is still the possibility of rising," Richard Haldane said. Churchill smiled bitterly. "After this fiasco, am I still qualified to continue leading the British Empire? Someone must be responsible for this. Indeed, the British Empire has lost even its capital, and someone always needs to be responsible for this fiasco." Churchill, the Prime Minister who was in danger, was undoubtedly the best candidate. "No, Your Excellency, this is not your fault. When you took office, the British Empire had reached the point of no return. Only you have the ability to lead the British Empire back to life." Richard Haldane hard to persuade. After a while, Churchill changed his mind and agreed to flee London and go to Canada. The next day, Churchill, together with senior officials of the British cabinet and members of the royal family including King George V, left London secretly. They will travel by car to Liverpool, where they will board submarines or destroyers and head to Canada in batches. Although, the British Army can no longer resist the Germans at home. However, these proud British people are obviously prepared to continue fighting until they are completely wiped out. British Secretary of War Richard Haldane did not leave with these people, but chose to stay and lead the resistance of the British Army in London. He appointed himself the commander of the London Defence and took over the command of all the troops in London. "I'm determined to fight to the death with the German army here." Chapter 818, Fierce Street Fighting. On September 20th, the German attack on London began. The German 1st Army and 2nd Army attacked London from the south. The German 3rd Army and 8th Army needed to detour and attack from the west and north of London, striving to wipe out the main force of the British Army in London and end the war once and for all. Although there are still more than 900,000 British troops in London. At the same time, the British Army has worked hard in London for a long time, building strong fortifications. However, the successive disastrous defeats on the battlefield made the morale of the British army low, and the soldiers were in panic all day long. If the officers hadn't been watching closely, the troops might have collapsed. The German attack on London still continued the previous combat method, that is, strong firepower preparations, and then dispatched troops to attack. German artillery launched a day-long heavy shelling of the South London area. A large number of buildings were destroyed by the German bombardment, including many cultural monuments, such as Greenwich Observatory, Big Ben and various museums and so on. In the eyes of people in the cultural circles, the behavior of the German army is comparable to that of wild animals. It is believed that these barbaric armies are brutally destroying civilization. However, the German army did not care about this. Now it's a war, and of course the most important thing is to ensure the safety of the soldiers. As for the others, they can be put aside for the time being. Those so-called cultural relics are of course very important, but the lives of the soldiers are the most important. The heavy shelling of the German army, coupled with the bombing of the Air Force, turned the southern part of London into ruins. Not to mention that the buildings were destroyed. Even the fortifications built by the British army in the city would also be destroyed a lot. At the same time, it also caused great losses to the British troops stationed in the city. On September 21st, the German 1st Army and 2nd Army dispatched 12 infantry divisions and divided into multiple routes to attack the city of London. The 3rd Army also dispatched 4 infantry divisions to attack London from the west. Although these troops amounted to nearly 300,000 people. However, compared to a metropolis like London, this amount of troops is nothing at all. When these troops dispersed, they disappeared like a river flowing into the sea. The German army is already very experienced in street fighting. They have fought many street battles in this war. In the beginning, it was the German 8th Army that summed up a complete set of street fighting tactics. Subsequently, this tactic was promoted throughout the army, and in the middle of the battle, it was tested. This greatly enhanced the German army's street fighting capabilities. In comparison, the British army is a rookie. Although they built a lot of fortifications in the city, including barricades and bunkers, they also deployed machine gun fire points on many buildings. However, under the indiscriminate bombing of the German army, the city was reduced to ruins, and the fortifications of the British army were naturally almost destroyed. Especially those firepower points deployed on buildings suffered heavy losses. The British army wanted to use these fortifications to stop the German army, so the difficulty can be imagined. Under such circumstances, the officers and soldiers of the British army can only fight on their own strength. However, it is a pity that the combat effectiveness of the British army is very different from that of the German army. Their performance in the battle is naturally conceivable. After entering the city of London, the German army quickly dispersed, attack in units of platoons. In street fighting, due to the influence of the surrounding environment, it is obviously impossible for large troops to gather and act, and they can only be dispersed as much as possible. In this case, it is often possible to maximize the combat effectiveness. Quick, quick, the Germans are coming, open fire, a British officer ordered loudly. Da da da, bang, bang. Dozens of British soldiers hid behind the barricades and opened fire frantically. With the weapons in your hands, pour bullets on the German army. The German army was suppressed by the powerful firepower of the British army for a while, and they were forced to lie on the ground and dared not move forward. Mortars, grenades, knock out the British machine guns, and fire with all your strength. The machine guns are ready to cover. A German 2nd Lieutenant platoon leader ordered. Boom. Boom. A 60mm mortar and 3 grenade launchers started shooting frantically. Shells and grenades smashed at the British positions. Though, neither the 60mm mortar nor the grenadier is very powerful. But for the fragile human body, it is a deadly threat. Boom. A mortar shell hit a heavy machine gun of the British army. After the shell exploded, the heavy machine gun was blown into parts. A large number of grenades fell into the barricades of the British army, and even the people who were bombed by the British army inside were turned upside down, and their flesh and blood flew everywhere. Da da da. Taking advantage of this opportunity, 1 general-purpose machine gun and 3 squad machine guns of the German army also started firing, and the intensive firepower suppressed the British army. Bastard. Fire. The British officer shouted. Snapped. A clear gunshot sounded, and the head of the British officer was like a watermelon, and it shattered at once. "This is a sniper lying on the ruins." Got. The officer was killed. A British soldier yelled in horror. Attack. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the German soldiers immediately moved forward. When they were still more than 10 meters away from the barricade of the British army, more than a dozen grenades were thrown. The grenade fell into the barricade of the British army, and the people who exploded were thrown off their feet. Subsequently, the German army successfully entered the barricade of the British army and quickly wiped out the British army inside. A German tank is driving on the street. In order to improve the assault capability of the troops, the German armored forces were also dispersed and joined the attack. Although, the loss rate of tanks fighting in street will increase a lot. However, the armor of the tank can withstand the bullets of machine guns and rifles, which is also a good defense. Behind this tank, followed by a dozen German infantry, they bowed their waists cautiously, vigilant about their surroundings. Boom. At the end of the street, an anti-tank gun of the British army was hidden in the ruins. The German tank is coming. Aim and kill him. The machine gun is ready. After destroying the German tank, kill their infantry. A British officer gave an order. Boom. The British anti-tank guns fired, and the armor-piercing shells hit the German tanks. The front armor of the tank was torn apart in an instant, and the tank exploded into a ball of fire. Da. Immediately afterwards, the British Army's machine guns began to fire, and the German army following the tanks suffered heavy losses under the British Army's fire. Chapter 819. Retreating steadily. Call for air support. Let the guys in the air team teach the British on the opposite side a good lesson. A German major and battalion commander said with a dark face. The area they attacked was a small park in London. In the center of the park is a hill. The British dug a large number of fortifications on the mountain, even bunkers deep into the mountainside. This made the German artillery unable to do anything to them. In the previous attack, they had left more than 100 corpses in this park. This naturally made the major battalion commander very angry. As a last resort, he sought reinforcement from the Army Air Corps. Yes, battalion commander. The communications soldiers immediately reported the problems they encountered to the division headquarters, and the division headquarters asked them to wait a while, and then contact the Army Air Force, which was responsible for bombing the park. In the park, a British major proudly watched the retreating German army with a telescope. HMPH. The Germans claim to be number one in the world, so they are still defeated by us now? It's a pity that they retreated. If they continue to attack, we will surely fill the entire park with German corpses. Eyeing the major looked smug. Sir, although the Germans were repulsed by us, they will definitely not give up easily. Next, they will definitely launch a stronger attack. A captain and company commander was a little worried. HMPH. The more Germans come, the better. The more they come, the more we kill. The British major officer said nonchalantly. This British major is obviously very confident in their fortifications. The fortifications that go deep into the mountainside can even withstand heavy artillery, coupled with the fact that they deployed a large number of machine guns on the mountain. This was enough to make the Germans smash their heads in front of their positions. However, soon the British major will know how naive his thoughts are. In less than 20 minutes, a plane from the German Army Air Force flew over the park. 8 F-2 fighters covered 24 H-1 bombers and arrived here. And, in order to deal with the fortifications dug by the British on the mountain, each H-1 bomber carried only one bomb. These bombs are heavy aerial bombs weighing up to 500 kilograms. If this place is located on the coast, it can be solved directly with the large caliber main gun of the battleship. But unfortunately, the British placed a large number of mines at the mouth of the Thames River, making it impossible for German battleships to approach. Therefore, all fire support has to rely on the Army's own artillery and Army Air Force. Plane. The German plane is coming. Quickly hide in the bomb defense hole. Damn Germans. Do they think they can destroy our fortifications by plane? It's just a dream. The British major hid in his headquarters and cursed. The German H-1 bomber began to lower its altitude. Bombs were dropped at a height of only 500 meters from the ground. Aviation bombs weighing 500 kilograms roared and smashed towards the fortifications of the British Army. The British soldiers hiding inside the fortifications saw that those planes dropped only one bomb. But when every bomb was extremely huge, his complexion suddenly became ugly. Why are the bombs dropped by the Germans different from before, much bigger than before? I don't know how powerful they are. Many British officers and soldiers had such thoughts in their minds. Boom. There was a deafening explosion, and the whole hill seemed to tremble. The fortifications built by the British Army on the mountain were immediately blown up. When the smoke cleared, a huge crater appeared on the mountain. God! How could this be? The British major was dumbfounded, as if he couldn't believe it at all. Immediately afterwards, other bombers also dropped bombs one after another. Explosions continued to sound on the mountain, and the fortifications built by the British Army were destroyed one by one. Even those fortifications built in the mountainside were not spared. Even if it was not blown up, it was collapsed by the violent explosion. The British Army hiding inside suffered heavy casualties. Attack. The originally suppressed German army seized this opportunity and launched an offensive. The British Army, which suffered heavy losses under the bombing of the German Army Air Corps, could not resist the attack of the wolf-like German army at all, and was quickly wiped out. It took less than half an hour from launching the attack to taking the park. The German offensive in the city of London was very violent, but also very smooth. Although, there are many British troops resisting. But these British troops are often hiding in the defensive offensive, trying to consume the vital strength of the German army with the help of fortifications. But they were often bombed indiscriminately by the German army, and they were easily defeated under heavy losses. Crunch, crunch. The German tanks are on the narrow street, and a squad of infantry is fighting behind the tanks. At the corner of the street, a British Hound Dog tank was hiding there. The performance of the Hound Dog tank is a little weaker than the German Panzer I tank. However, in street fighting, the 37mm tank gun of the Hound Dog tank can also cut through the armor of the No. 1 tank as easily as a knife cuts tofu. The armored forces of the British Army also know very well that, because of the gap between the performance of the tank and the quality of the tank, if it is in a field battle, they are not the opponents of the German army at all. Therefore, they simply deployed tanks in urban areas as a defensive force. The tank gun of the tank can destroy the German tanks, and the machine gun of the tank is even more powerful against the infantry. The No. 1 tank of the German army did not realize the danger, and continued to advance. Boom. When the distance between the two sides was reduced to 100 meters, the British Hound Dog tank opened fire. An armor-piercing projectile bombarded the frontal armor of the German No. 1 tank. Under the action of huge kinetic energy, the armor-piercing projectile easily penetrated the armor of the German No. 1 tank. At the same time, the ammunition inside was detonated. The entire tank was hit into a fireball. The German soldiers following the tank quickly lay down on the ground. The machine guns of the British tanks began to fire, and the bullets flew over their heads whoosh, whoosh, making the German soldiers dare not raise their heads at all. Boom. There was another gunshot, and the British tanks fired again. This time it was replaced with a high explosive bomb, and the shell exploded in the German queue, killing 2 German soldiers on the spot. However, this tank of the British Army did not last long. Soon, the German anti-tank guns moved up, and destroyed it with one shot. Chapter 820, Surrender into the System. The British Army fought by the German Army in the city of London was retreating steadily, and countless British soldiers even lost the courage to resist. When the German Army attacked, they fired a few shots at random, and then gave up their positions and fled. This made the city of London, and soon a large area fell to the Germans. On the day of September 21st, more than 20% of the urban area in South London fell into the hands of the German Army. On September 22nd, once again 20% of the area was captured by the Germans. By September 23rd, the space for the British Army's activities had almost been compressed to the banks of the Thames River. If this continues, the city on the south bank of the Thames will soon fall into the hands of the Germans' army. At the same time, the German 8th Army had already circled to North London and launched an attack from North London. However, given the limited strength of the 8th Army, their main task was to prevent the withdrawal of German troops from the north. Therefore, the strength of the attack is not great. However, this was a fatal blow to the morale of the British Army, because this means that London has fallen into the siege of the German Army. The British Army in the city has no other way to survive. General Crook, General Below, It seems that we will soon be able to occupy the entire southern London area. Marshal von Falkenhayn further moved his headquarters to the outskirts of London. Although the battle continues. But Marshal von Falkenhayn is very confident in the German army. He confidently believes that it won't be long before London will be completely captured by the German army. Yes, Your Excellency the Marshal. We can take South London in 2 to 3 days at most. As for whether we can take the whole of London at the end of the month, I can't guarantee it. But at least we can take it at the beginning of next month. Down to London, said Admiral Crook. The German First Army was the main force to attack London, and it performed very well, which made General Crook proud. It can be said that after this battle is over, Admiral Crook's promotion to Imperial Field Marshal is already a certainty. Your Excellency, Marshal, the fighting spirit of the British is getting weaker and weaker. Maybe after we take South London, the British will not be able to hold on. At that time, we can easily take North London. Admiral Below said. Marshal von Falkenhayn nodded. The continuous defeat undoubtedly dealt a fatal blow to the morale of the British army. In the case of low morale, the combat effectiveness of the troops can't be displayed at all. And this is undoubtedly of great benefit to the German army. They can defeat the British army more easily and occupy London with minimal cost. It's a pity. London is the largest city in the world. However, after this battle, London is completely destroyed. Marshal von Falkenhayn said. Now London has indeed been destroyed. Especially in the southern urban area, where the battle is fierce. There is not even a single intact building in sight. The northern part of the city is a bit better. However, when the German army captured the southern part of London and began to attack the northern part of the city, it is believed that the northern part of London, like the southern part, would be turned into ruins under the heavy shelling and bombing of the German army. Of course, the generals of the German army did not feel any guilt about this. Because they have done a lot of things like this. Wasn't a world famous city like Paris also destroyed by them? As an enemy of the German Empire, you have to be prepared to pay a heavy price. The capital was destroyed, and that was only one of the costs. The German army is victorious in London, which is undoubtedly a great shock to other countries. Although, they all expected the British to fail. However, I did not expect that in such a short period of time, Britain's defeat was already set. Originally, they thought that they could use the British to weaken Germany's strength. But now it seems that the British can't even do this. Especially the Americans on the other side of the ocean suddenly felt a surge of pressure. President Woodrow Wilson has asked more than once to further enhance the military power of the United States to deal with the powerful military power of Germany. With the current military strength of the United States, it is not an opponent of Germany at all. If it weren't for the barrier of the Atlantic Ocean, it would be very easy for Germany to defeat the United States. On the south bank of the Thames, the headquarters of the 43rd Infantry Division of the British Army, an infantry division with more than 10,000 people has less than 5,000 people. It stands to reason that with such a large number of casualties, the army should have collapsed long ago. However, until now, they are still fighting. It was not because of anything else, but because the Minister of War Richard Haldane had issued an order, and if he retreated without his order, he would be dealt with by military law. Before, several division commanders fled back to the north bank of the Thames without authorization. As a result, Richard Haldane followed his word. Now those guys are still hanging on the gallows. General, what should we do now? We have been cut off from the 45th Infantry Division. A German unit has cut into our junction. Now, we are surrounded by the Germans. We have organized multiple counterattacks. I wanted to open up the connection with the 45th Infantry Division, but none of them succeeded, said a colonel. Major General Rickey, the commander of the 43rd Infantry Division of the British Army. His face was as dark as the bottom of a pot. The Minister of War is crazy. They want us all to die on the south bank of the Thames. We did our best on the battlefield. It's not that we don't work hard, but the Germans are too strong. But he wants us to go send it to death. The other regiment leader also had a look of anger. Among the armies of Western countries, surrender is not a shameful thing. Of course, the prerequisite is to do your best. Therefore, when there is no other way, most of the armies of Western countries will choose to surrender. In this case, at least you can save your life. But this time was different. Richard Haldane issued a ruthless order. prohibiting the troops on the front line from surrendering, requiring them to fight to the end. This is unacceptable to many British officers and soldiers. General, we can't beat the Germans. If we continue to fight, everyone will die here. Otherwise, let's surrender to the Germans. The Chief of Staff also suggested. Major General Ricky considered for a moment, then nodded. Okay, contact the Germans and ask them to guarantee our personal safety, and we surrender to them. Major General Ricky said. Yes, General. The other British officers immediately beamed with joy. The next day, the entire division of the 43rd Infantry Division of the British Army surrendered to the Germans, becoming the first unit to surrender to the Germans in this battle. Chapter 821, Full. British War Office, Underground Command. Richard Haldane stared at the London Defence map hanging on the wall. His eyeballs were almost red, like a gambler who lost his eyes. The current situation is very unfavourable to the British Army. The entire south of London is almost occupied by the Germans. The remaining British troops could only hide in the south bank of the Thames. It is estimated that it will not be long before they will be wiped out. Although, Richard Haldane has long expected that there will be such a day. However, the speed of the German advance was completely beyond his expectations. It can be said that the German army did not even have the ability to stop it. This battle was really aggrieved. Under the fierce attack of the German army, the British army seemed so vulnerable. The generals stationed in the southern part of London kept sending telegrams to the headquarters, requesting to withdraw to the north bank of the Thames. However, Richard Haldane still refused verbally. Although, Richard Haldane knew that this would make those generals very dissatisfied with him. But he still did it. Richard Haldane hopes that they will be able to persist in London for a while longer. In this way, Churchill and others can leave the UK calmly, and at the same time, the German army can pay more in London. But now it seems that they can't do this at all. As for resisting the German attack, Richard Haldane had no hope of it. Your Excellency, some frontline generals have requested to retreat. They have been beaten by the Germans and there is no other way. If they are not allowed to retreat, they will soon be wiped out by the Germans. Admiral Haig reported. Although, the First Army led by Admiral Haig was almost wiped out. However, Richard Haldane did not punish him, but let him serve as the Chief of Staff of the London Defence Command to advise him. However, the current situation has become so critical that there is nothing worth planning. No. Tell them, we must fight to the death. If anyone dares to retreat without authorization, they will be dealt with by military law. Richard Haldane's eyes flashed a ruthless look. Yes, Your Excellency. Admiral Haig nodded. He knew what Richard Haldane meant. However, he didn't think it was a good idea. If it is not done well, I'm afraid it will backfire. It's just that the current Richard Haldane can no longer listen to advice. General Haig, how long can we last in London? Richard Haldane asked. Your Excellency, I'm afraid the southern city can't hold on for long. It can last for 2 or 3 days at most. The Thames River cannot be a natural barrier to stop the Germans from attacking. Even if we blow up the bridge on the river, it can only stop the Germans for a while. I personally estimate that it can last for 10 days at most, said Admiral Haig. Their capital can only last for such a short time, which is undoubtedly a torment for Admiral Haig. However, there is no way. As a soldier of the British Empire, he can only hold on as long as possible. In this way, Your Excellency, the Prime Minister, they can transfer more people and wealth to Canada. We can have a better chance of defeating the Germans. Richard Haldane sighed. Take a breath. Admiral Haig nodded. He knew that Richard Haldane, Churchill and others put their hopes on future wars, and hoped that with the help of Canada and the Americans, the British Empire would be on fire. Rebirth. However, Admiral Haig did not have much confidence in this. He didn't think that with the help of the Americans, it would be possible to fight against the Germans. That's simply not realistic. After winning this war, Germany will become the new world hegemon. Their power will extend to the whole world. I'm afraid that the British overseas colonies cannot be held at all. At that time, Germany will become more powerful because of the acquisition of these colonies. The United Kingdom, which has lost its native land, is tied to the Americans, so don't even think about confronting Germany. Of course, even if Admiral Haig thought so in his heart, he would not say it out of his mouth. That is of no benefit to him. Your Excellency, the 43rd Infantry Division has surrendered to the Germans. Suddenly, a staff officer rushed in and reported to Richard Haldane. What? Richard Haldane's face suddenly became very ugly, even though he had already guessed that such a day would come. But I still didn't expect that this day would come so soon. Is it a single unit, or the whole division? Admiral Haig asked. The entire 43rd Infantry Division. The officer reported. Bastard. How dare they disobey my order? Ricky, I must hang him. Richard Haldane roared angrily. Admiral Haig looked sad and didn't say anything. He knew that Richard Haldane was just venting his anger in this way. Major General Ricky, who has entered the German prisoner of war camp, will be very safe. What made General Haig even more worried was that the behavior of the 43rd Infantry Division undoubtedly set a bad start for the British Army. Next, more troops will surely surrender to the Germans. The 43rd Infantry Division will be a model for those units. It's no wonder who made the current situation so unfavorable to them, and Richard Haldane sent those troops to die. Those generals, as long as their brains are not trapped by the door, they all know how to choose. Sure enough, on the day the 43rd Infantry Division surrendered to the German army, the British troops stationed in the southern London area surrendered to the German army one after another. This allowed the German army to occupy the southern part of London without bloodshed. Even the troops in the northern part of London are ready to move. After the German army occupied the southern part of London, it began to attack the north bank of the Thames. The British army tried to stop the German army on the Thames, but it couldn't be done at all. The German 3rd Army and 8th Army had already crossed the Thames. And, during the battle, more and more German troops who lost their fighting spirit began to surrender to the German army. Even if Richard Haldane tried his best to suppress it, it would not have the slightest effect. When the British army surrendered to the German army, the British army was powerless. On October 3rd, the northern part of London was completely occupied by the German army, except for the Ministry of War, which is still fighting. The rest of the area has been controlled by the German army. Of course, this is mainly because most of the British army voluntarily put down their weapons and surrendered. Otherwise, the German army will have to fight for a while. Chapter 822, Fall of Empire. London, War Office. Now the battle in the whole of London is almost over, and only here is left. As the hiding place of the Minister of War, Richard Haldane, thousands of elite troops have gathered in the entire Ministry of War, and they are still continuing to resist. The German army dispatched a regiment of troops and surrounded the entire Ministry of War. However, with the help of buildings and machine guns, the British army blocked the firepower. The German army organized several attacks in a row, but they failed. Outside the positions of the British army, many corpses have been left. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, several armored vehicles drove to a place not far from the battlefield. Marshal von Falkenhayn and a group of regiment commanders got out of the armored vehicles. Hearing the deafening gunfire erupting in the distance, Marshal von Falkenhayn couldn't help frowning. If the battle here is not over, it does not mean that the entire London campaign is over. Why haven't you finished? Marshal von Falkenhayn asked. Your Excellency, Marshal, those British firepower is very fierce, and they have built solid fortifications, and the terrain limits the deployment of our troops, so they have not been taken down yet. But Marshal, please rest assured, before sunset today, we will conquer this place. A Major General assured. Have you tried to persuade them to surrender? Admiral Crook asked. General, we have tried it. However, those British are not willing to enter. Even at this point, they still insist on not surrendering. The Major General said. I didn't expect the British to be so brave at this juncture. Admiral Below sighed. The other generals nodded repeatedly. Indeed, in this war, the British did not perform well. It can even be described as bad. On the battlefield, they were not opponents of the German army at all, and they could be described as vulnerable. There are millions of troops in the sky, and the equipment is not too bad. However, under the onslaught of more than 1 million German troops, it was quickly defeated. But as long as their fighting will is firmer, even if the German army wants to win the final victory, it will not be so easy. Therefore, the performance of the remaining British troops stationed at the Ministry of War is impressive. Now the whole of London has fallen into the hands of the German army, and the British army in the city has basically been wiped out. Their persistence is completely meaningless. Under such circumstances, they can surrender to the German army and save their lives. However, they still didn't do that. It can be seen how brave they are. Send someone to try again. If they don't surrender, arrange the Army Air Corps to use heavy aerial bombs to raze this place to the ground. Marshal von Falkenhayn said. Although he hates and admires these British people, he doesn't want to waste any more time. Yes, Your Excellency the Marshal. The Major General replied. A few minutes later, a German officer, holding a white flag, entered the British War Department and informed the British Army of the German Army's request. Richard Haldane at this moment is still staying in his office in the basement. Your Excellency, the Germans have come to persuade us to surrender again. They ask us to surrender. Otherwise, they will no longer keep their hands. The secretary reported to Richard Haldane. Richard Haldane sighed. He also knew that the battle had already been lost and Britain was finished. Let the soldiers choose. Richard Haldane said. Yes, Your Excellency. The secretary nodded. In the end, none of the British troops stationed here chose to surrender. They were willing to continue fighting for their honor. An hour later, the German army dispatched the Army Air Force. 12 H-1 bombers, carrying heavy aerial bombs weighing 500 kilograms, bombed the British Ministry of War. These heavy bombs easily penetrated the buildings of the Ministry of War building, was half destroyed in the previous battle. The remaining part was also blown up under the tremendous power of aerial bombs. The British soldiers stationed here were almost all killed in the violent explosion, and very few survived. However, the German army then conducted a carpet search here. The British soldiers who were unwilling to surrender were all killed. As for Richard Haldane, when he was discovered, he was already a cold corpse. However, he was not killed by the bomb, but committed suicide by taking poison himself. He ended his life with poison before the German bombing began. Maybe he didn't want to die in the hands of the Germans. Even if he died, he wanted to die in his own hands. It was not until after the battle here that Marshal von Falkenhayn had someone report to Berlin that the battle in London was over. Liverpool, in the port, a submarine is moored at the pier. Several people were smoking cigarettes on the pier. The most central one is Churchill, Prime Minister of the British Empire. As Prime Minister of the British Empire, Churchill was the last senior official to leave the UK. Before him, King George V of England and other senior cabinet officials had already left Britain for Canada. Your Excellency, the time is almost up. If we don't leave, I'm afraid it will be too late. A naval officer was a little worried. During this period, the German army stepped up its search for the British coast. Even if it is a submarine, it is very difficult to escape. Wait a little longer. Churchill shook his head. The officer hesitated to speak, but there was nothing he could do. After a while, the secretary ran over panting. Your Excellency, the battle in London is over. The Germans have completely controlled London. Our army in London was either wiped out by the Germans or surrendered to them, the secretary reported. Churchill closed his eyes in pain. Although he had already expected such a result, he still did not expect that the British Empire would be destroyed so quickly. Where is Your Excellency the Secretary of State for War? Churchill asked. The Lord Secretary of War killed himself before the fall of London. Churchill nodded. He did not expect Richard Haldane to be so staunch. However, he admired Richard Haldane very much. If it were him, he would definitely do the same. Let's go. Churchill dropped the cigarette in his hand. Now that London has fallen, the downfall of the entire British Empire is imminent. There is no need for him to stay any longer. Going to Canada and leading the re-emergence of the British Empire is what matters. He believed that, although they failed this time, they would definitely have revenge one day in the future. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 823, Dismember Britain. After the fall of London, the German offensive did not stop. Several main armies began to march to other parts of the UK. Wales, Scotland, and Ireland have all dispatched troops successively. Although, in Ireland Germany has supported Sinn Féin and the Brothers of the Republic. However, facing the hundreds of thousands of British troops stationed in Ireland, their strength is still too weak. If there is no direct German intervention, they want to take the entire island of Ireland, so I don't know how long it will take. The German army wiped out the main force of the British army in the Battle of Canterbury and the Battle of London successively. Although there were more than 1 million remaining British troops, they were almost all mobs. They were not even fully equipped with weapons and equipment, and their training was seriously inadequate. Some even couldn't even fire a gun. Under such circumstances, how much combat power can these British troops be expected to have? Facing the German attack, the remaining British troops undoubtedly had only one choice, and that was to surrender immediately. In this case, a little life can be saved more or less. Otherwise, the consequences would be much more serious. Of course, a very small number of British troops chose to continue to resist, and they fled to the mountains to resist stubbornly. But what awaited them was the encirclement and suppression of the German army. Although some British troops survived tenaciously like weeds, however, they no longer pose much of a threat. In general, Britain has been occupied by the German army. In London, the capital of Germany, Emperor Qin Tian was very happy when he received a telegram from Marshal von Falkenhayn from England. Everyone, it has been 1 year and 2 months since the war started last year. Now, it can finally come to an end. Qin Tian was very happy. Although, the area occupied by the German army in Britain was not large at that time. However, the main force of the German army has been eliminated, which means that the German army's occupation of the entire UK is already a certainty. Your Majesty, the war is finally coming to an end. Then, we can now focus on domestic construction and the digestion of the occupied areas. The Imperial Prime Minister Billow also smiled. The end of this protracted war made Prime Minister Billow finally heave a sigh of relief. Although Germany won the war, Germany undoubtedly paid a huge price for this war. The military expenditure alone is a huge expenditure. Even if a large amount of war reparations were extorted from the defeated countries, it would not be able to make up for this big hole. Of course, if other benefits are counted, then Germany still made a profit. The large territory has expanded the living space of Germany. The fertile land of the Eastern European plain has enabled Germany to be self-sufficient in food. The vast overseas colonies will enable Germany to obtain a huge market and source of raw materials. It is foreseeable that the German industry will take off once again, as if it has wings. Your Excellency Prime Minister, what you said is wrong. The war is not over. It can only be regarded as the end of a large-scale war. The next small-scale war may have to last for a long time. Minister of the Navy Marshal Earl Pitts said. Oh, how should I say it? Prime Minister Billow was taken aback. If we want to win all the overseas colonies of the British, it will be impossible without military force. India, Australia, and South Africa alone will have to mobilize a lot of troops to fight them down. However, the intensity of the war, no, it was only that high before, said Marshal Count Tirpitz. Billow nodded. Of course he knew this. British colonies are still in the hands of the British. Although the British mainland was occupied by the German army has not yet occupied those colonies. The British will not hand over those colonies to Germany just because of the fall of the mainland. If Germany wants it, it can only send troops to it. Of course, those colonial Germanies must also be grabbed, whether it is India, South Africa, or Australia. They are all rich colonies. Even though Germany has acquired many colonies now, it still covets these colonies. It can be said that the main reason why the British Empire was so powerful and able to dominate the world was because of these colonies. Through the wealth looted from these colonies, Britain was able to maintain its hegemony. If Germany can take all those colonies, then Germany's strength will be further enhanced, and its status as the world's hegemon will be completely stabilized. Those colonies are too important. We have to get them. This is unspoken. Prime Minister Billow said. Although the continuation of the war means that a large sum of money will be spent like running water. However, in order to win those colonies, no matter how much money is spent, it is worth it. What's more, the war to attack those British colonies will not be as fierce as the previous European war, and the money spent will not be too large for the German government to bear. Your Majesty, what should we do with Britain? After our troops occupy the entire territory of Britain, we must sign a peace treaty with them. Foreign Secretary Vachter asked. Support an obedient British government. After all, with such a large population in the UK, it is impossible for us to directly rule. Qin Tian said. Britain has a population of more than 40 million. Although it is smaller than Germany, if Germany directly rules Britain, it will definitely encounter endless resistance from the British. At that time, Britain will become a big mud pit, directly dragging Germany to death. Qin Tian would not do such a thing. Okay, Your Majesty, we will look for suitable candidates. Wahid said. In addition, the dismemberment of the United Kingdom can also start. According to our previous plan, the United Kingdom will be divided into 3 countries, and England, Scotland, and Ireland will be independent. Let them check and balance each other. Ireland. Qin Tian said. Originally he wanted to make Wales independent, but it was more difficult. In this case, even the divided England is very powerful. This can be seen from the population alone. After the division of Ireland, there were only 4.5 million people. Scotland also has only 4.8 million people. And England and Wales add up to 36 million people. This figure is already 4 times that of Ireland and Scotland combined. Therefore, Germany must support Ireland and Scotland, especially their military strength, and let them deal with England. Only in this way can Germany's control over the British Isles be ensured. Chapter 824. 3 countries. The core areas of the United Kingdom are undoubtedly England and Wales. As for Scotland and Ireland, they are actually not important. Even if these 2 places are lost, England and Wales, with a population of 36 million, are still one of the most powerful countries in the world. In order to prevent England and Wales from rising again and threatening the security and interests of secondary Germany, Qin Tian must find a way to weaken their strength as much as possible. Otherwise, once a war breaks out between Germany and the United States in the future, the British Isles are very likely to become a time bomb. Qin Tian hopes to restrain England and Wales by supporting Ireland and Scotland, among other things, to suppress the military strength of England and Wales as much as possible, and at the same time, help Ireland and Scotland improve their military strength. The military strength of the 2 sides is not equal. In this case, if England and Wales want to rise again, it is only a problem to settle Ireland and Scotland. In this way, Germany can control the entire British Isles at the lowest cost. Everyone, although our military operations in the British Isles are not over yet. However, follow-up arrangements can begin. Try to establish 3 countries in the British Isles before Christmas. Qin Tian said. Yes, Your Majesty. Everyone replied. The military operations of the German army on the British Isles went very smoothly. When the British army was vulnerable and surrendered one after another, the German army's operations on the British Isles were like an outing. Wherever they went, the British troops voluntarily surrendered one after another, and there were very few British troops who dared to take up arms to resist. Especially after these people were brutally suppressed by the German army and ended up miserable. Not many people dared to fight against the German army. Although the fall of the British Empire was a pain in the heart for many British people, compared to before, it is obvious that their own life is the most important. What's more, the mighty British Empire collapsed under the German attack, let alone weak individuals like them. A clear understanding of the situation is undoubtedly the most important thing. The German army took control of the entire British Isles less than a month after the Battle of London. As a result, except for the Second Army who stayed in the UK, the other 3 armies began to withdraw from the UK one after another. The large troops stationed in the UK also put great pressure on the logistics of the Imperial Army. Besides, the troops have been very tired after fighting so many battles. The war was finally over, so it was natural to return to the mainland to rest. When the German troops withdrew, the German government also began to support forces on the British Isles, preparing for the follow-up arrangements. On the island of Ireland, Sinn Féin and the Brothers of the Irish Republic joined forces to form the Republic of Ireland. Patrick Pearse, leader of the Brothers of the Irish Republic, became the President of the Republic of Ireland, while Griffith, head of the Sinn Féin party, became the Prime Minister of the Republic of Ireland. The first thing after the establishment of the Republic of Ireland was to sign the Alliance Treaty and become a member of the Alliance. Moreover, a package of military cooperation agreements was signed with Germany, and Germany supported the establishment of an army of 150,000 people in the Republic of Ireland. This army includes the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Of course, the army is the main force, with 6 infantry divisions and 2 armored brigades. This is already a very large army for a country with a population of just over 4 million. At the request of Germany, in addition to being responsible for the security of the country, half of the Irish army is stationed in Wales and England to assist the German army in maintaining stability here. The reason why Germany did this was to use the Irish to suppress the British. There are many things that the German army is not suitable to do for the sake of its own image. However, the Irish are perfectly fine with being these guys. For hundreds of years, the Irish have been bullied by the English. Now they are retaliating against the English without any psychological barrier at all. Subsequently, Scotland also established a republic. With the support of Germany, Charles, a local political task in Scotland, served as the president of the republic. Of course, in fact, the Republic of Scotland is just a younger brother of Germany, and everything is listened to by Germany. The Republic of Scotland also joined the Allies and vigorously developed its military strength with the support of Germany. Like the Republic of Ireland, they established an army of 150,000, including the Army, Navy, and Air Force. The main force is still the Army, with 6 infantry divisions and 2 armored brigades. Half of these troops, stationed in England and Wales, assisted the German Second Army in maintaining law and order in Britain. Otherwise, it would undoubtedly be very difficult for a single legion to control such a huge Britain. After all, the Second Army only has more than 200,000 people, while Scotland and Wales add up to 3,600 people. Once caught in a human sea war, the English could easily overwhelm the German Second Army. The remaining England and Wales were the last to form the country. After losing Ireland and Scotland, England and Wales formed the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom of England and Wales. Queen Victoria's youngest son, Prince Arthur, acts as king. The 65-year-old Prince Arthur was unlucky. When the royal family evacuated from the UK, the warship he and his wife and children were on was discovered by the German Navy. Originally, they should have been sunk. However, in order to save his life, Prince Arthur ordered the warship to surrender. Just like that, they survived and fell into German hands. Prince Arthur embraced the role of King of the United Kingdom of England and Wales. Although, as Queen Victoria's son, he did so shamelessly. However, for himself, he was very happy. After all, not everyone has a chance to be king. Originally, it was impossible for him to have such an opportunity in his life. But now that the opportunity is in his hands, why would he give up? What's more, in this way, he can seek a throne for his descendants. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of England and Wales is Andrew Bernard Law of the Conservative Party. After the fall of Britain, not everyone could escape to Canada. There are still many underappreciated people who need a stage for them to display their talents. Even if the enemy provided them with this stage, they would not refuse it. Because they can pretend to be compassionate and have to cooperate with the enemy for the sake of the British people. In this way, they will still be able to become the high and powerful people. As for patriotism, how much is that thing worth? Chapter 825, Never Give In. After the establishment of the United Kingdom of England and Wales, armistice negotiations with Germany began immediately. Week-long negotiations between the German Foreign Minister and the United Kingdom Prime Minister. Of course, in fact, the negotiations only took one day. Basically, the German Foreign Minister Vaucht proposed the conditions, and the United Kingdom Prime Minister Andrew agreed to the conditions. The reason why so much time has been spent is just to deceive people. After the talks, the two sides signed the German-British Peace Treaty, which stipulated that Britain surrendered to Germany and assumed all responsibilities for the defeat. As a subject of the United Kingdom will also assume corresponding responsibilities. In the next 10 years, the United Kingdom will pay Germany 50 billion marks in war reparations and transfer all of Britain's overseas colonies to Germany. The German Empire can station troops in the United Kingdom to help the United Kingdom maintain law and order, and the United Kingdom will bear half of the military expenses for the garrison. The Army of the United Kingdom, controlled within 100,000 men, no longer has a navy and air force. A coast guard could be created to combat smuggling and rescue at sea. The ships to be equipped must not exceed 5,000 tons. All unfinished warships under construction in the United Kingdom were handed over to the German Empire. Similarly, the United Kingdom of England and Wales also joined the Allied powers and became Germany's younger brother. Under Germany's various means, the former British Empire was completely destroyed. Even though King George V and Churchill were still in Canada intending to rise again, it was almost impossible to realize this dream. On the corpse of the British Empire, the three countries re-established have become Germany's younger brothers. It can even be said to have become a running dog of Germany. Under such circumstances, Germany not only has a solid defense on the east coast of the Atlantic Ocean, but also has a pile of cannon fodder. Once the United States launches an offensive, it must first resolve these three countries. They will use their own blood to buy time for Germany to mobilize its troops and counterattack. Of course, if Germany wants to attack the American continent in the future, they can also act as the vanguard, which can be said to serve multiple purposes. Toronto, as the largest city in Canada, it assumed the function of the capital after the British royal family and government moved to Canada. Of course, there will always be only one capital of the British Empire, and that is London. Toronto can only be regarded as a companion capital at best. In the humble palace, King George V is getting angry. Damn. The Germans, they actually split the British Empire into three countries. The Irish and the Scots actually betrayed us. If I had known earlier, the British Empire shouldn't have treated them well these years. George V won face of anger. After learning what happened in England, he could no longer calm down. Although the British government has never treated the Irish and Scots kindly in the past, it does not prevent them from putting gold on their faces. What's more, George V is not a fool. He naturally knows that, now that the Irish and Scots are independent, even if they defeat Germany again in the future, it will be very difficult to unify the British Isles. Will the Irish and Scots who have enjoyed the taste of freedom accept the rule of the English? That's almost impossible. And Arthur, as the son of Her Majesty the Queen, a member of the noble royal family of the British Empire, how could they betray the British Empire and seek refuge with the Germans? I will expel him from the imperial royal family. George V roared angrily with. Although Prince Arthur can be regarded as the uncle of George V, he now only has hatred for Prince Arthur. The Prime Minister of the British Empire, Churchill, said nothing. He was not surprised that Germany would take very severe measures against Britain. However, he did not expect these measures to be so vicious. This is clearly to cut off the chance of Britain's rise. However, Churchill had to admire the Germans, and these methods were very effective. After Britain split into three countries, it is not so easy to reunite. Even if they are unified by force, there will still be a big gap. At that time, they will face endless contradictions. As for what Prince Arthur did, Churchill declined to comment. People are selfish. For Prince Arthur, being an ordinary prince is not as good as being a king. Even a puppet king with little power is enough to make people's hearts flutter. Originally, Britain was a country with a constitutional monarchy, and the king had no power. Being able to get a king's surrender in his 60s, Prince Arthur probably would wake up with a smile when he fell asleep. Your Majesty, the Germans are indeed too vicious. They did this to cut off the foundation of the British Empire's resurgence. However, we have nothing to do with them now. We can only think about it after defeating the Germans in the future. There are ways to solve these problems, Churchill said. George V nodded. Although he was very unwilling, he also knew that, as Churchill said, they had nothing to do with the Germans now. At most they just vented their anger verbally. Apart from that, there is no other way, Your Majesty. Although these problems are very difficult, as long as we can defeat Germany and regain the homeland, then everything will be fine. If we cannot defeat the Germans, then everything is empty talk. Therefore, defeating Germany is the most important thing, Churchill continued. Your Excellency, I understand what you said. Don't worry, the royal family will fully support you this time. The British Empire will not just perish. I hope that in my lifetime, I will have the opportunity to return to the British mainland. George V said, "Yes, Your Majesty. Please rest assured, Your Majesty, God will bless us. We will definitely defeat the Germans." Churchill said, "With the full support of George V, many things will be much easier to solve. For example, the financial problems that plague them. If the wealth held by the royal family is taken out, these problems can be solved easily. They can expand arsenals and shipyards to produce more weapons and equipment for the army of the British Empire, allowing them to regain a strong army and navy and prepare for defeating Germany in the future. Of course, the current British Empire's army has lost almost all of it. But Churchill believed that as long as there is enough financial support, everything will be rebuilt soon." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.